What is it you want, Barry? What do you want? You want the moon? Just say the word and I'll throw a lasso around it and pull it down.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, dying times here.
Come with me if you want to live.
That's it, man. Game over, man. Game over.
The Force will be with you, always.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to 20th Century Geek. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and we are continuing the Superman saga, but we're taking a bit of a sort of sidestep, a side quest, if you will, from the main sort of films. We've done Superman 1, 2, 3, 4 and Returns, and now we're just taking a bit of a stop to contemplate and reflect, and we're actually going to be discussing Super/Man, the Christopher Reeve story. And I have returning guest, novice to the Reeve Superman films, Mike Burton. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing very well. I mean, we'll get into documentary in a bit, but I'm sadder after watching the documentary. Uplifted by Superman and brought down a bit by Super/Man. There you go. Yeah. Not brought down because it's not like sad. It's not like depressing, but it was like, oh, my heart. So yeah, but really excited. Thank you again.
It's an emotional journey.
I'm so excited. I've now watched all of the Reeves films. We've done the Reeve roundup. Done it.
Yeah, and we are going to do a roundup. I'll check in with you on your 3 and 4, see what you think. But more than that, we've got someone else, another returning guest. We've got Maff back from the Annals of Conan to come and join us now to talk about Superman. And it's your first sort of part of the saga, so I'm actually going to start with you then, Maff. Firstly, how you doing? You all right?
Not too bad. Yes, this is a weird one because, like, I mean, as you said, the first 2 films, without going back, before going back and kind of rewatching them, they were muddled together, and that, and
in your
like,
head kind of thing.
Yeah. I think you kind of got Zod kind of mixed up in the first one and that, which, as it turns out, should have been, but
yeah.
Also going back and watching that bit of Smallville at the start, I thought was quite a quick thing, and it's like, okay, come on, get on with it, you know. I think that's where some superhero films have kind of fallen. It's like, let's tell you the backstory and let's see Martha lose her pearls again. And it's like, we know, we understand this. You don't need, but I suppose back then it's a bit different because it was all new.
This was the first. Superman the movie is like the first
major
Superman
one, really.
Yeah.
There'd been TV before.
Yeah.
But this was the first proper major. So, and it works, but you do kind of feel that, come on, you just needed someone just to kind of prod it on a little bit more. Superman 3, still to this day, scares the crap out of me.
I want to himp on that because it's funny you say that, yeah, because I'm a big fan of Superman, the original. I think there's a sort of like I definitely think there's a generational thing where I sort of like, you know, it was one of the first things. I even watched it before Batman. I remember watching it as a little kid, and you get quite a thing in it, and you get through them. But yeah, I never expect like the end of Superman 3, like even watching it as an adult, that one moment, like you're still like, because it's the 80s and you know there's no CGI involved in it. You're like, it kind of makes it worse.
I think the thing is, I wouldn't show it to my youngest, but I think my oldest did kind of see it. He's like, what are you watching? And I said, oh, this gets quite intense. And he's like, oh, all right, Dad. And that, whereas, but I think nostalgia kind of kicks you back there and you kind of go back and you're thinking, oh, shit, yeah. You know, it's like first watching Aliens for the first time. You know, things like that. It's more than nostalgia that kind of gets you back in that moment. But I still think it's quite horrifying that all of a sudden she's getting wrapped up in the cords and pulled in, and you're thinking, oh my gosh. And then again, once that happens, that transformation, then Superman's doing it, and you're thinking, could this do this to Superman? We're not knowledge of superheroes back then as what we are now, so we didn't know. And that, but it's fine because a bit of acid will sort it all out.
Yeah, no, I do find the sort of, it's an odd one because you sort of said you've seen the reviews. I'll be interested what Mike, your opinion on 3 Years in particular, like, but it's more of like a Richard Pryor film than it is a Superman film. Yeah. So when the
Richard
end
Pryor
happens,
featuring Clark Kent,
it's exactly. Christopher Reeve.
Yeah. Um, and we'll get to his sort of feelings on 3 and 4 that sort of highlighted in the documentary. Um, but it is an interesting one. And 3 is a departure. There's no returning Gene Hackman. You got what's it, Robert Vaughn.
Lex Light.
Yes. Yeah.
It's a strange, forgettable villain, really. You only really can kind of. I could only really remember Richard Pryor, to be fair.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't remember who, and obviously I remembered the woman as well, but I couldn't remember. And watching it and thinking, oh, Lex in this, and okay, that's fine. It's just, random multi-billionaire guy.
Yeah. But you remember the woman, but not her relationship to anybody else in the
No,
film. You're just like, oh, she gets turned into a robot.
yeah.
Cool.
I know she's gonna scare me. I mean,
Yeah.
she looks scary before she turns, to be fair. Get a
Yes.
bit Evil Ed kind of from Thunderbirds and that, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's. And then there's Superman 4. Um, it, it's it was a weird kind. You could feel that the budget just dropped,
Mm-hmm.
and
But
you
it's a
could
Canon
feel that.
production.
Yeah, I suppose back then, one kind of aware that Canon was. I mean, Canon was kind of pulling out a lot, but again, it was 80s. That was something we were brought up on. So
Mm-hmm.
Canon film more, kind of action blockbuster. Stuff that my uncles let me watch that I probably shouldn't be doing.
But yeah, you're like, oh, these are the ones that did those ninja movies. I'm in. That's about it.
Yeah, it's all the cool stuff that, my
Yeah.
mum would probably saying, no, you shouldn't be watching that. But I'd go and stay at my uncle and aunties and with my cousins. It's like he had older brothers, and it was like he probably kind of saying what Mike would have been, hey, guess what? I've got Cobra. Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
There's a film called RoboCop. Don't worry, just get through the first 20 minutes, you'll be
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
Scars you.
Yeah. No, I think
But
4 is that I don't know. One of the things I noted about 4, and it was when I was sort of talking to Dan, and we were sort of like, back and forth and talking about, and then you realise, as you just mentioned RoboCop, which kind of reminds me, it comes out in 1987, which is the same year as RoboCop and Predator, and you're kind of like, oh, oh no, like it, and you put it on that part, and you're like, oh no, this feels like it's still in like 1984 or even less, like 82.
you can kind of feel as if RoboCop and Predator said, "You've got a budget. You don't
Yeah.
need that budget. Superman 4 is pantomime in a
Yes.
way, and it, it's unfortunate that was the last one that he did. It didn't go out in a bang,
Mm.
and that you know. But I suppose each one of those, if you can go back and watch it and understand that this is a bit tongue in cheek and it's not. I think I think one of the best things about the first two is Superman is the most powerful person there is. And I think the best storytelling is that he's so powerful, but he can't use that. He can't punch his way out. Because Lex isn't someone that he can just go deck
Mm.
because, I mean, he'd kill him.
Yeah.
So he has to try outsmart him. And this is the most intelligent guy that there is. So it's that kind of balance of trying to him pit his skills that he can use to save the day
Mm.
and that. And I mean, especially in this film that the documentary we've just watched, I think you understand why Christopher Reeves is Superman because he's such a good guy and he's trying to do the right thing and not getting it right all the time. This documentary shocked me. The
Mm.
fact of how honest there was about a lot of stuff. They didn't try to sugarcoat. I mean, I have read up on that. I think there are things with Glenn Close that we can get into later, but I think that they were quite open and bare about things. But I think that's why the first two films really work,
Mm.
and that even though they're a bit of a mismatch, the other Superman films going forward, I think the problem is sometimes it's too much punchy, and
I
you
I was
don't need that.
No, I agree, and I think one of the things you highlight there is a really good point. Is the punchy. Like the first 3 films don't end in like he has no one to punchy. it has the other things he does, and some of them are baffling, like using his heat vision to weld an oil rig full of oil, which even I'm clever enough to like. It's kind of dangerous, but
not
fair
as
enough.
freeze breath, which
Freeze
would be the
breath.
logical
Yeah.
thing you would use. No, let's use the heat vision.
Yeah. But you're right. But like, it's not until Canon get involved, and Canon are like, we brought you American Ninja and Cobra, and every Chuck Norris and the last 4 Death Wish films. So we're going to turn Superman into Punchy Punchy, and you're like, yeah, it's not surprising that they created Nuclear Man because that's totally the canon way. But it's it feels like it loses an innocence in doing that, which I
think it loses what Superman is at the core. The whole truth, justice, and American way kind of thing. To let's just deal with it with. I mean, that him taking the nukes, making that decision, and that like you said, it was a bit confusing when all the nukes kind of get shot up, and it's like, well, hang on a minute, he was meant to kind of do it. Are they all thinking, quick, let's deploy before he takes him away? And well, I think when you and Dan was discussing it and saying no, they all kind of set it up so that he could take them away. It's like, yeah, I suppose that makes sense, maybe.
Yeah. Oh no, yeah. And the thing is, we now live in an era where, like, in 1987, sort of like the tail end of the Cold War, and there's still problems in the Middle East and stuff. But like the scene where he sort of confronts the UN and everyone starts cheering, and you're like, no, hang on, no. There's like hundreds of years of strife in this room. Like, no one just goes, that's right, we're all going to disarm our nuclear programs overnight because Superman says so. And if you were to do it today, I just imagine more recently, if Superman sort of stepped up to the UN or whatever and was sort of like, I'm searching for peace and to bring, prosperity and peace to the world. Next to him, a little orange fart would be like, the guy's just a weakling. He hasn't got all the cards. I got the cards. I don't, Superman doesn't know what he's talking about. That kind of thing. Like, it wouldn't work today. You don't get that.
Well, even if you took all the nukes, it's not like you've taken every weapon, every bioweapon, every, submarine, every missile system, every jet. It's like, it's not, nukes are not the only thing. If one would argue, to be cynical, is nukes are the one thing stopping everyone from always being at war because it's mutually assured destruction. So surely if you take the nukes away, everyone's then going to be fighting back the way they were,
that's it.
Several decades ago, which actually would more violence, wouldn't it?
That's a really good point. We can't have nuclear war, but we can have a sort of entrenched land war now,
which is
yeah, it's a good point.
Goldie Looking Chain said it. Guns don't kill people. People do.
Yeah.
You could disarm everybody, but it would just come back. And
all the struggle right now in the world, that's going on. None of that is about nukes.
Yeah,
in fact, the last 30 years, there's been one incident, I think, which was allegedly about nuclear arms, a certain country having it, and then it turned out that was all rubbish to get their oil. Aside from that, nukes have never really been in the question, apart from North Korea allegedly trying to get everyone with nukes occasionally.
Even now, like the strife between India and Pakistan, it's sort of, and even everyone's like, oh my god, they're nuclear powers, and even they're going like, whoa, no. Yeah, we don't like each other. We've got some real problems, but like neither of us said we were going to do that. Like, yeah, it feels very kind of alarmist. But that was the 80s. I mean, this was sort of, we were terrified of the nuclear
computers and nukes. They're the two big things. Those computers are going to
do anything, though, couldn't they?
Yeah, they can change the structure of traffic lights and how they physically work and create sentient life in the traffic light people. Because that's what traffic lights are. They're two sentient people giving traffic guards. They're not a light that's white going through a plastic cover, no, in the shape of a man. No, they're literal living beings, and the computer can change that.
Precisely.
Yeah. So anyway, so that's the sort of the Reeve. Anything more from Mike, from your sort of point of view? Because
yes,
you've touched on.
I won't verbally waterboard everyone because I'll say this is that I'm on my Patreon.
Join his Patreon because it's all on there.
Yeah, I've done a 30-minute. I've stole Scott's idea. I did a 30-minute thoughts solo on Superman 3. I'm planning on doing one for Superman 4 either this week or next week as well. So because Megan wouldn't. Megan was like, "Yep, I've seen Superman 1. I'm okay now." It's like that's
Done.
she's not seen 2, and I did not make her watch 3 or 4. So there's no afterthoughts in the 2 of us. It's just me. So I will be doing a full thoughts. I did my full 30-minute thoughts on Superman 3. I think Superman 3 is worse than Superman 4. Now, when I say that, I mean Superman 4 is a worse film. The Superman 4 is more enjoyable. Superman 3 doesn't feel like, because of Richard Pryor, it doesn't feel like it's in the ironically phrased the canon. If Superman 4 was the third film, it would make sense, because the third film in most trilogies often is the worst one.
Yeah.
And it falls off the rails a little bit. But, you know, the Superman 4, he's generally got the same consistent amount of weird powers that make no sense. Gene Hackman's back in it. Lois Lane's back in it. All of the themes are quite similar. He feels more like he does in 1 and 2. 3 feels like almost like a spin-off, or like 3 should have been Superman 4. And I think, you know, I really like the Superman 3 stuff when he goes to Smallville and all the quiet moments, because I think Clark Kent is so charming. I love it. I really, really like it. And I think Lana Lang's amazing too. And I just think all of the Pryor stuff and all the villain stuff and all the computer stuff is so wanky and boring and not funny. And I describe it in my Patreon as they all sound like jokes, but there's no punchline to any of them. So every line that's a funny line, it feels like it's missing 2 or 3 words every time.
But I think this is, and one of the things is with Richard Pryor in '83 is competing with Eddie Murphy.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think this is the way you see this thing of like, you know, because Pryor, if you ever watch Pryor's stand-up, and he is funny, but like he couldn't do his stand-up today. Like it's insanely offensive.
It's like Chubby Brown taking the stage.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, even Murphy was bad, but like Pryor was kind of like, you know, was on another level, and he was looking for that kind of Hollywood, because he'd had his time. Like, you know, him and Gene Wilder, you know, had obviously sort of done a number of were starting to do things. And this kind of feels like him without his comedic partner in Gene Wilder. Like he doesn't have that thing to bounce off, and because he's on his own, like it, as you say, like there isn't the punchline.
Yeah.
Or there isn't the sort of the balance that comes from him and Gene Wilder, and I think that's where the problem is. Exactly that.
It feels lost in the film. It's like if you had a film about Richard Pryor being like the zany, like basically a goofy IT guy who's seemingly allegedly an idiot, who actually turns out to be a super genius, ignoring how coding works and all that stuff. That could almost be a fair, if Richard Pryor had more freedom and it wasn't like a PG movie. That could be like a pseudo R-rated 80s comedy starring Richard Pryor doing that with a super genius who keeps asking him for more and more ridiculous things. That could be funny.
Best version of that is if you ever go see Brewster's Millions.
Okay, I've not seen that. No.
Brewster's Millions is Richard Pryor and John Candy.
Oh, yeah.
A couple of others. And it's just basically like he finds out that he was sort of like the illegitimate son of whoever, and he has this uncle who is his only living relative, and he was a sort of a multi-millionaire. And so he calls him in and says, like to Brewster, played by Richard Pryor, you've got 30 days to spend, I think it's 3 million?
3 million, yeah.
Oh, I've heard of the premise, but
if you spend it all and you cannot own anything other than the shirt on your back,
everything has to be receipted.
Everything has to be receipted. So it's like, you know, you can give 5% to charity. You can do this. This is how much you can gamble, but everything else has got to be receipted. And you're going to buy all this other stuff. You can't just give it away. And at the end of it, if you do that, you get 30 million or 130 million or 300 million or something like that. And that's actually a really good film.
And I've heard of it. Yeah, I've heard that premise before. But I think Superman 3 for me, it was also, even though it's shorter than Superman 1 and 2, it feels really long. But again, because half it's a Pryor film, and it just doesn't really go anywhere. And it was just, the end computer bit was all right, but it just opens up too many plot holes with the kryptonite stuff. I like Superman versus Clark. I thought that was cool. The way it was shot is one of the best scenes I think I've still seen in modern day, where it's meant to be like the one person playing the 2 roles. Obviously, you've got body doubles, but I thought that looked flawless.
It looks good, yeah.
But then Superman 4, partly because I knew going into it was going to suck, I think I adjusted my expectations. And I think the drop from like Superman 1 and 2, I think are pretty even, but it's almost, it's one of those arguments where which is better? Well, it just depends what you prefer. Do you prefer more punchy? That's Superman 2. Do you prefer more Boy Scout? That stuff is probably Superman 1. But they're both, I'd say, for the most part, equally good. Then like 2 films that are like 9 or 8 out of 10, and then it drops to like a 4 out of 10. Yeah. And I think that even if Superman 4 is maybe a 3 out of 10, the drop from Superman 3 to 4 is very slim. So it's almost like two duologies. And I just think Superman 4, Gene Hackman's over the top and weird, but that's fine. Nuclear Man is terrible, but it's funny. It's like funny bad. So it's like all the crap scenes in Superman 4, they don't last very long. And it's really fast paced, probably because everyone doing it was on cocaine. So it's like, this is shit. Oh, it's over now. Whereas Superman 3 is like, this sucks. Yeah, we're going to be sat here for 10 minutes watching it. You're like, can we just get to something else, please? Even the interesting bits. Whereas I think Superman 4 is...
I have a question then.
Yeah.
Having watched the documentary, because I wasn't aware that Reeves and his name's going to completely out me now. His best friend, Robin Williams.
Yeah.
Was actually so much good friends. Would Superman 3 been better if you got Robin Williams in there?
I think it could, but it could have also been worse because I love Robin Williams, but I think that if you don't have something or someone to rein him back, if he still had to do, I think Richard Pryor, the problem wasn't his personality, the problem was what he was doing. So I think even if you had zany Robin Williams being crazy while doing he's making weird noises while doing that whole scene where the knocked out guard and he has to turn the two keys at the same time, that whole scene. I remember watching that going, I'm watching a Superman film here.
Yeah.
This is like a really badly done Laurel and Hardy sketch, but Laurel and Hardy's good. It's not. So I think personally, if I had to watch one of the two, I will watch Superman 4. It's shorter, it's snappier, it feels like a more direct link to Superman 1 and 2. But I think 3 for me is definitely the worst. It feels like a slog, and my main takeaway from 3 is the film is very disjointed and oddly sexually charged. It's just so weird. So much of it is because of how Superman goes and has sex with that woman and then destroys the oil rig stuff. That's the whole thing. And then the main Lex Light, it seems like he's kind of sleeping with this woman who's
is it like a truck that he gets there and it's like they just turned up a bit earlier, Superman. It's like, oh, okay. Did the guy die?
But it's like there's not much of, not that I'm a prude, but the only real thing is it's lightly insinuated with Lois and Superman, I think, in Superman 2. That's really it. Yeah. And it's like I didn't expect it, and it was so overt, and it was literally like he gets on her when she's wearing a certain outfit, and I'm like, what is going on?
But he's bad Superman at that point.
Yeah, I know.
He's Snyder Superman at that point. So that's
but yeah, so I thought
weirdest thing about that. Sorry,
go ahead.
The woman who the blonde,
Laureline or something like that.
Yeah, Laura, something like that. Played by Pamela Stevenson, who is a trained psychologist or psychiatrist. Was part of not the 9 o'clock news, and is married to Billy Connolly.
Oh wow!
So it was really weird when you sort of go through those things. You're like, oh yeah, no, I know her from a number of other things, and yeah, that's really weird.
It also felt like there were too many characters in 3 because you've got Richard Pryor, you've got Lex Light, you've then got the sister Vera or whatever, then you've also got Laureline as well on the bad side, air quotes, even though only really the guy is the bad one and the sister kind of is. So you've got these 4 people in a room, all not really being very funny, vaguely bouncing off each other for ages. And then you've got Laureline just kind of, I'm really smart, but I'm not going to tell anyone and it's never going to pay off.
It's just, that infuriates me that it never goes anywhere.
Whereas at least 4 is like, okay, you apart from, was it Lenny? Not Lenny, the nephew.
Yeah. Was it Cryer?
Yeah. John Cryer. Yeah, like you've got Lex, Nuclear Man, sort of Lenny, and then Superman, Lois Lane. And it's quite tight in that regard as well. So I think they're both pretty crap films and definitely a massive drop. I didn't hate either of them, but I think I enjoyed 4 more, to be honest.
4 comes with, I think, before we move on to the sort of the seriousness of the documentary and stuff. Well, I think we have this sort of an appreciation for something that's camp.
Yes.
And I think that 4 has a campness to it that you can appreciate because it's silly, and 3's kind of still has those, despite trying to be a comedy, has those sort of self-serious moments, and it's still trying to deal with certain themes, sort of like the inner turmoil of being the bad Superman or the good Superman and all that kind of stuff. Like it wants to say something, or at least try to. So it kind of gets a little bit bogged down in that thing. 4's just like, no, we got nothing to say. but we've got a man in brown spandex. You're like, oh,
Yeah, well,
cool.
I think it was with 3. I know it's easy to say this, but I think in 3, if you didn't have Superman versus Clark, and then a little bit of the Superman bad scenes, which the sequence of Superman versus Clark is like 10 minutes or so.
Yeah.
But outside of that, if you take out that fight scene in the junkyard, there's very little that I'd say is redeeming. Whereas I think with 4, there's hundreds of little silly moments. Like the nuclear missiles in the net is one of the stupidest things I've ever seen in my life. But it's so beyond the realm of insanity. It's even beyond, like, even comics probably wouldn't do a net, and not just nuclear missiles, already launched ones. Ones that when they are going to touch something, they're going to explode. Let's put them all in a giant net next to the Earth. Like, it's so dumb, and it's like Lex cutting his hair in the museum. Doesn't make any sense. But it's kind of like, okay, nothing in this film makes sense. That's fine. Whereas Superman 3 is like, no, this is, as you say, it's quite serious and stuff. Right, now Richard Pryor is going to fall out of a skyscraper with skis, and it's never going to be brought up again or mentioned. And then let's move on. And you're like, where is this? What are you trying to be silly and campy and nonsensical? Or you not? And I think Superman 4 kind of goes full ham into it, which I think it kind of it almost knows what it is.
Oh, in 100%.
It has its own identity, even though it sucks.
Even like you say, and it was, I think Christopher Reeve kind of wasn't happy with it, as we'll get into. But I think you're right. I think if you look at the history of canon in and of themselves are a fascinating little 80s sort of, microcosm of sort of things. They were kind of running out of steam by 87, and this was their big push. And so they'd bought a lot of IPs, because obviously in 86 we get Superman 4, which was supposed to be sort of the first of many, He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. They were already started to work on the Punisher. Like, they were really pushing into that. They were looking to do. They'd already done a poster for a Spider-Man film.
Oh God!
Yeah, no, they didn't own the rights. Let's be clear, they didn't own the rights, but they were like, well, if we put a poster out and it does, and the poster gets a lot of attention, we'll go get the rights, because that's how they worked. And I believe they were approached by, that's where the whole Michael Jackson thing came up, where Michael Jackson approached several people to be like, "Can I play Spider-Man?" And I was like, no, because that's just creepy and weird.
Weird alternate realities of what almost could have been. I know one of the big ones is Nicolas Cage's Superman, but it's like, I feel like, though, the last thing from me with Superman, I would like to hear if Maff prefers of the two, but I feel like with Superman 1 and 2, I think if you like one more or you like two more, both valid, both excellent films. And then separately, if you like 3 more or you like 4 more, both valid, both not very good films. But if you like 3 or 4 more than 1 or 2, I strongly disagree with you. You could have your own opinions, but I think you're a bit deluded.
Yes.
But what of you two? Before I'm not trying to take over your pod, Scott, but what do you each prefer? Like, of 3 and 4 out of interest? Like, I haven't heard from you much, Maff. Like, what do you? Because I took over this whole conversation.
Three has got, like I said before, 3 has got something there that scared me. So there's kind of emotional things that I can go back to and think, oh yeah. But Superman it's like we said, he's guest starring in his own film. He's not in it much.
Yes.
Whereas at least in Superman 4, although the quality is not as good, like you said, they do hit certain things. You've got familiar villains there. He has someone he can go up against. So there is a bit of punchy, which, although, you don't always need that, like we said, but it is good that he has someone to kind of bounce against. I suppose, I think I would probably rather watch Superman 4, which might come in handy because that might be a project that people are doing soon. But can I just watch Superman 1 and 2?
No, you're not allowed. You can only have Superman 1 and 2 when you've had Superman 4. You're only allowed to dessert when you've had your vegetables.
Can I watch The Flash? I watch that instead, because Superman's in there for a brief second.
Yeah. I will say that with Superman 4, that the space stuff's cool. I liked that very much.
I think, for me, I'll throw it out that you say I'm very much on the I've just checked my letterbox. I gave them a 3 out of 5 each because I think there are
Very
things.
generous.
No, and well, firstly because of that fun factor where I'm like I like a lot of things in 3. I have it in this Math as you said, like there's a nostalgia for me with 3. I think it's one of the first ones I probably watched. That then I went back. I remember I watched I remember seeing 3 and then going back and seeing like 2 and 1.
Well, that's the way to do it. If you ever,
Yeah.
if you ever want to
Oh
show
my
your
God,
kids,
these are gonna be
show
better.
Superman 3 first, and then go, do you want to see something really cool? I'll show you Superman 1.
But 2, there's just like a camp joy to 4. Like like you said, like what's it, Crier sort of is just like ridiculous. Gene Hackman as Luthor is just clearly having the time of his fucking life. Like everything he's doing is ludicrous, and he's enjoying it. And I just think,
I wonder whether possibly more people in the UK would find Superman 4 better. 'Cause in America, they don't have pantomime, really. It's not sort of a thing. And I think like, Superman 4 is pantomime. So there's certain things there you can kind of think, it's like he's behind you, Superman. Oh
like
no,
Doctor
he
Who
isn't.
almost.
Oh yes, he is.
Yeah, hokey. It's sort of like whimsical in a sort of I agree.
There's a British humour kind of to it, whereas
And a lot of it was filmed in Britain, the Milton Keynes UN.
Amazing.
So I think it's weird because I think before having this conversation, I would be no, Superman 4's the worst because it looks the worst.
Oh yeah.
But it's probably more enjoyable.
I think it is.
Sometimes watching them really crappy films and you think, I know these are crap. I know going back to watching it, and it is all nostalgia that's going to get me through this. But there's still something about it that actually, it's not. I mean, I remember, I watched it, I think about a week ago. And after, I was thinking, it was all right. I don't feel that I completely wasted all my time watching it. It was fine. I could have sat and watched YouTube for an hour, so
yeah.
I mean, some of the stuff that my little one watches on there with, roadblocks, and it's like, oh my God, let's put something else on, please.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think, I think Superman 2 is my favorite, and then 1, and then I would probably go 4, then 3.
Yeah.
If it's just doing these 4.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I think 1, Superman the movie is my favorite. I love the saga of it. I love the sort of the big every element. The sort of it's basically like 3 stories told over different times, and it has my favorite scene of all the Superman things in it is when he comes out and the sort of like the pimp dude is like, that's a bad outfit, and he says, excuse me, and then flies off, and like and it's topped off by like the most sort of Superman moment, the end of it after everything's happened. You have him just sort of circling the earth and he just sort of smiles at the camera. Now that moment in itself is just like the most, it just captures me so much. 2's good, but I always feel like I can feel the disjointedness in it, but I do think it's the second best one. But I do now think, the more in reflection, I do think 4 is better, simply because it's so silly. Like, I'm going in going, like, I can just appreciate how silly this film is. Like, it's a Superman film, it's the end of the era. This is, I'm watching a lot of canon films at the moment, especially like Chuck Norris ones, and I've got like this kind of appreciation of like, this is kind of shit, but I'm kind of really enjoying this for some reason. And so I think it's in that camp where I am. I'm kind of like going, this is ludicrously silly. And I know it's cheap, but I can't stop watching this and I'm kind of smiling about it. I mean, to top it all off, to say about how the confidence went with this, I forget the guy's name who plays Nuclear Man.
Mark Pillow or something?
Mark Pillow, yeah. Thank you. For the UK royal premiere of this, he wore the Nuclear Man costume to meet Princess Diana.
Yeah.
Now, come on. Like that's kind of, that's a baller move, that is. So I kind of respect him because of that as well. So fair play.
I think you're definitely putting a sock down there as well, just in case.
Make sure it's warm in the auditorium. Don't it be too cold. Anyway, right.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I don't know if it's best to do it here or maybe at the end, but with everyone who has played Superman, who is not Christopher Reeve, because I think everyone would probably go. I mean, that iconic moment of him. A lot of people say that iconic moment of when he kind of does that stand up and he becomes Superman. I love that, but I also love the bit afterwards when he then reverts back
Oh,
and
the
he
whole
goes,
scene is
and he
perfection.
kind of puts the glasses on. He's,
Yeah.
sorry, Lois. But who is your favorite Superman if you were to take him out?
I only know one other, so I've
Well, no,
only
I think
seen Henry Cavill as Superman, to be honest. So
I honestly think, and as I'm going through this, I haven't been back and watched Man of Steel. I've watched Superman Returns, and I haven't seen Man of Steel for a while, so I'm going to get to those to Max. But it's one of those weird ones that we don't have. Well, and I think this happens with the Batman as well. We don't have there's no definitive Superman. Like Christopher Reeve is the Superman I sort of feel has the most Superman energy. Because of just how sort of sincere he is and how sort of how he plays it. Also, one of the things I don't think that gets mentioned enough for Christopher Reeve, he has brilliant comic timing. Like some of the stuff his clumsiness is just perfect physical comedy that he never really did anywhere else, and I just think that's a real shame. But then as you go through, sort of you have Brandon Routh is that sort of nostalgic reach back. Which is probably that's a real turn of phrase I'm not going to use again when talking about Brian Singer. But there's but Brandon Routh is kind of that sort of nostalgia sort of knock on, but it feels very relevant to that sort of era when they were like, oh, this is the pre New 52 kind of thing, but we're looking back, it's still that thing. I think they capture Superman physicality incredibly well in that film. I think Brandon Routh again is one of those unfortunate actors. Yeah, unfortunate actors that kind of fell by the wayside because of certain things. Henry Cavill is just New 52, New 52 Superman. They were just like, we're going, we're going to go more modern. We're going to go. It's like Rob Liefeld came and sort of did Superman. So it's not, and I think Cavill is good as Superman. I think he's the worst
Clark Kent, yes.
Without a doubt.
Yeah, I think Brandon Routh, he has the ass. He physically looks like Reeves, and that he's got his charm off, and that although the movie unfortunately never went anywhere afterwards, I love the fact that we got him in DC Legends of Tomorrow and Arrowverse, and he got to then replay. Is it Superman?
Kingdom Come,
isn't it? That he plays. He got to kind of redo that role, and kind of it felt like he did his swan song, and I think he was really good. I know they're not the greatest things, the Arrowverse stuff, but they filled a spot and they was enjoyable enough.
I think they're all right. I kind of like them. I think they got a place. I think they got a place to in entertainment history.
But I also like, is it Tyler Hoechlin who's in Superman and Lois?
Yeah, I've never watched that.
Right.
So I saw him when he was in Supergirl and those sort of things. I think I've seen the pilot of Superman and Lois, but I've never watched the whole. I've never got around to watching the whole series.
I mean, it is very much more Clark and family and him and to be fair, it's a lot more Lois than he is, and that. I think it's better than the Dean Cain and
Terry Hatcher.
Yeah, I think it's better than that.
Yeah.
It's
not a high bar, though, is it? Really? Let's be fair.
Yeah.
Dean Cain's kind of lowered that over the years. So.
But yeah, I think if you take Reeves, I think Brandon, I wish there'd have been a bit more with him. Henry Cavill, again, like you say, he's a good Superman. He's just not a good Clark. He doesn't have the alter ego.
Especially compared to Reeve. I found that was the biggest thing I found with watching these movies was literally, I was like, I absolutely adore. I would love the Adventures of Clark Kent. I wanted the alternate universe where Reeve just played Superman for ages, and then we got like a little series or something, and it was literally just almost like Superman and Lois, but like Clark and Lois. And I just want to see, a man who's as powerful as a god trying to pretend he's not strong. Like my favorite scene in all the original Superman stuff is when Lois gets mugged in the first. I think it's the first one.
It is the first
and
one.
he kind of trips and catches the bullet kind of thing, and he's like fall on the floor. He's like, no, Lois, just let them take the money.
Pretends to faint.
And it's that's it. He pretends to faint, and I'm like, I loved that. Whenever he's been an absolute goofball, and as you said, the comic timing. I know in the pod you did with Spider-Man about Superman 4, and it was like when he's slipping on the hotel, and his feet on those like shoes, like the dress shoes, are going like up and down like flippers. That is amazing, and every time I see that scene, I'm like, that is ace. So I really didn't know almost what I was missing, because where I saw Snyder's Superman first, who is quite the angry, I'll punch you once through 18 buildings Superman. And it's like his Clark Kent is like, you're just Superman in disguise. And I think that's why a lot of my generation probably are a bit more like, oh, the glasses are Superman. Glasses on Clark Kent. How can anyone not realize it's Superman? But when you see Reeve Superman do Clark Kent compared to Henry Cavill, you're just Henry Cavill glasses. But when you see Reeve do it, you're like, oh, I really understand that.
Oh, Ralph manages it as well. Yeah, Ralph manages it as well.
Every part of it, 100%.
One thing I would say is, just as a sort of to wrap this up, and actually I'm going to use this as a segue, right? I think one of the things you said about him having the power of a god, right? And Matthew said about that sort of how Reeve projects that body type and that sort of thing. One of the things I would say about the Cavill Superman, and I'm going to get to Man of Steel and stuff, I'll cover this in much more detail, but I think this comes to what you're saying as well, Mike, is Cavill Superman is a power fantasy.
Yes. There's almost like anime, isn't it?
Exactly that. It's kind of sort of like this is, and not to say he's like Omni-Man or like, Homelander. I'm not saying he's an evil Superman anyway, but they present Snyder's obsessed with a power fantasy. That's his thing. It could be male, it could be female. He's not, gender, but if you watch all of his films, they are all about a power fantasy. And that's where I think he can talk the talk, but he loses it when he projects that thing. That's why I think, despite his Watchmen being a very beautiful looking film, it kind of is slightly like off. It's kind of like 5 degrees off what Alan Moore was intending, because they're like, Alan Moore's like, Rorschach's one of the worst people in the world. Like, I'm telling you, like, Rorschach is not a good guy. And like Zack Snyder's going, no, he's badass. That whole scene of him in the prison. And you go like, no, you're not getting.
But he likes Homelander, and he's like, no, you're not meant to like.
Exactly that kind of thing. But
Christopher Reeve's Superman wouldn't do the thing with the truck.
Exactly
in Man of Steel. He would have watched it and thought, right, fine. I could tell you anyone, I'm not going to do.
Yeah.
I'm bigger than that. Whereas Henry Cavill's does completely short, and it's like, why would you do that? You don't gain anything from doing it.
I think that's it.
Yeah.
You're not.
He doesn't pull his punches. I think that's almost the thing, and that's one of the things I like about. I know compared to like Spider-Man, and the more we've been doing, listening to your pods and stuff, Scott, is how Raimi completely copied Superman. Completely. The first film's the origin. The second film he loses powers. The third film he goes bad. And you're like, literally, I know that the templates of Superman is, used in a lot of different things, but I was like, with Spider-Man, I like all 3 Spider-Men in live action for different reasons. But I think the line that hits the hardest for me is in No Way Home, when Andrew Garfield loses Gwen Stacy, and he says, I stopped pulling my punches. And I know you see that in certain comics, certain games, mainly when the symbiote comes in, you see, especially when playing Spider-Man 2. The game. And it's like, well, it's a lot of the time when he gets, he punches without, and people go, Spider-Man, you need to ease up a bit. And I think with the Henry Cavill Superman, it's kind of like, he doesn't seem to pull his punches as much. Whereas the thing is, we're leading what you were saying, Maff, is like, Reeve Superman, his whole intrigue with Lex is trying to find a way to beat him without literally just punching him through a building. Whereas if it was like Cavill,
he could just pop his head off. He'd be like,
easy. He could just flick it, and it would shatter all his bones.
I couldn't catch him.
Yeah.
Okay. But it's, I mean, just very quickly, if you want to see Spider-Man going badass, there's a comic called Back in Black. I won't say too much, but if you want to see him kind of not pull his punches as much, is
that the one with Kingpin?
Yes.
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
that is what that builds to at the end.
Yeah,
and that is a fantastic. I mean, I've reread that 5 or 6 times.
Oh, cool! Thank you. I'll make a note of that. Cheers.
But let's do this because we've talked about Reeve, and let's now get to we've said this. I think Reeve is important to this, and documentaries almost sort of as we segue in. So we've talked about Reeve. Documentaries about actors are tricky business because they often follow one of two paths. They're either the sort of tell all, here's all the dirty secrets, and it's kind of there to almost ruin the rose view of them. Or it's a puff piece and it's kind of wanting to sort of say how good they are. This one, I think, is definitely is slightly more in the second camp because of what happens. However, it's almost what I loved about this film, the Superman. Before we get into it, is the fact that it runs two parallel lines. So it jumps from his early career as he's sort of becoming Superman and goes through sort of his 80s career and things, and then it flicks forward to him after or during and after the tragedy of 1994. And so to see those sort of things in parallel and sort of seeing sort of like, where he was at when he was in his 20s and then where he ended up and that sort of thing was interesting, because I think what you get to see is a man dealing with both his height and his low, like the highest highs and the lowest lows. And you kind of see that of like that to me is for not sound cheesy, but the making of a man. That's how you sort of recognize it, sort of like, and I thought it was incredibly moving to see that he's like, no, I was flawed, and I was, you see it in glimpses throughout him being younger, but like he still was strong enough to get through with his family and stuff, the tragedy. And so to have it in that parallel running, I thought was interesting, but really benefited the story. But yeah, that's it. So I mean, Michael, jump to you really first. What were your key takeaways from Super/Man?
So with me, well, I don't have a history of Christopher Reeve. So I knew of him existing. My older brother, who's much more your guys' sort of age, born 76, and he introduced me to a lot of stuff. His favorite Superman too. So I was like, I knew about Christopher Reeve, but I was born in 94. So for me, he's always been gone. It's one of the reasons probably I like the Star Wars prequels, because as long as I can remember, Jar Jar's always been about. But with it, I found one thing I really stood out was the visualization of the injury, which I quite liked, where they had the statue of him and they had the kryptonite coming out of the statue. I thought that was quite tastefully done. But one of my main key things is what you kind of said, Scott, which is I really like the two storylines that are ongoing. I don't know anything about Reeve. I didn't know he was a director. I knew he had an accident. I thought it was a disease. I didn't realize it was like a fall off a horse and stuff. I thought he got a disease that was incurable, and that's what turned him into it. That's what caused the paralysis. Yeah, exactly. So I did find that interesting, and I really liked hearing from the children. I think the oldest one, I think it was Will. It might have been
Matthew,
Matthew. Sorry, yeah,
Matthew's old,
So Matthew Reeve, I quite liked hearing from him the most, because where he's the oldest, and he was like, oh yeah, he says a little bit of nice stuff, and then because Megan watched the documentary with me. And we were both taken aback when he says, my dad wasn't really there for me in the early days. And he was, my mum suffered quite a bit when he went, went to America, and then he eventually met, his second, well, technically his first wife, but his second partner.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then, as you say, once he had the accident, it was a horrible tragedy. But one of the things that Christopher Reeve said is that he really learned to listen. And I was like that. And, he really, what the children were saying is like, being around dad was different. Being around him when he was like this, it meant that because he couldn't do anything, he really took the time to get to know you a lot better, because he wasn't like up and doing extreme sports and busying himself with stuff. His real passion then became just spending time with you and just listening to you. And, I imagine some of your listeners know about my backstory, but, I lost my dad 11, 12 years ago now to cancer. And so the last year and a half of his life, he got more and more ill. And then the last sort of 6 months, he was very ill. And one of the main things I remember was he passed away in May. I think that my mum and dad's anniversary was like a few weeks or a couple of months before that. And there's a point where he was so ill, he was still vaguely able to move, but mum did have to take care of him and stuff. And mum went out the room, and then he said to me, look, it's our anniversary coming up. I'm not well enough to go to the shop and get a anniversary card. Can you do it for me? And that was one of the moments I'm like, Jesus, That's one of those moments you don't forget. And I feel like that for me connected quite a lot with this, where it's like I've got the memories of sort of dad before he was ill. And although the memories of him being ill was a shorter period of time, it was from me of like, 17 and a half to 19. Me becoming a man in air quotes was when dad was ill.
Yeah.
So I feel like for me personally, I really connected with this in a lot of ways, especially with the older sibling, because although I loved dad to pieces and he was great, I'm the younger of the siblings, and my brothers are 17 and 20 years older than me. So their memory of dad when they were growing up is different to my memory of dad, me growing up, because he learned stuff. He learned different lessons. He learned to be more caring, more this. And also, I am the product of a second marriage as well. So there's lots of parallels in this story that I felt personally really connected. And I want to throw it out there. Didn't know he was friends with Robin Williams. And I thought when Glenn Close, I think it was said, if Christopher Reeve was still around, Robin would be too. You're like, because Megan loves Robin Williams. Megan, when he came up on screen, Megan, she lit up. She was like, I didn't know they were friends. And seeing them together, like Robin never was like never really mentioned the illness around him in a sense of like, didn't want to bring him down in that sense, but that's just what Robin was like. And all the stuff Robin did for him. And I'm like, it was so touching. I found that this was very informative. It was quite honest. And it was, for me personally, it was very touching.
Okay, cool. Well, I'm glad you were able to watch it. It sounds like we'll get into some of the bits and pieces. But Maff, what about yourself? What are your sort of initial sort of take on it?
I'm going to apologise because I'm going to echo an awful lot of what Mike's just said. My dad passed away 11 years ago this year. Cancer. He, unfortunately, as well, 2 years before that, he had an aneurysm, and unfortunately, the blood clot went down, but it went into his leg, got caught, and he ended up having his leg amputated above the knee, to which he was told he wouldn't walk. And that. Now, my dad growing up was a customs officer. He wasn't around. He would come back, he would bring presents every now and again, and we would see him and he'd be like, oh, great, dad's coming, he's brought us some, and then he would disappear for weeks, months, and that, to the point where my mum kind of finally had enough and said, look, you need to be part of this, or we need to go. So at that point, he decided to become a milkman, which, that's what I do nowadays. And it was a transition, which I kind of feel that I can relate to this because then dad was there. And then he had to learn to become a dad because he, to be fair, he didn't know what he was doing. And that. So then there was all this, and, it was very good at winding me up and that, but, it was kind of character building, as he kind of said to me, so that, I would be able to be fine in the big world. As I say, then he lost his leg, and we had 2 years of him kind of. I remember going to do physiotherapy with him, and there was a guy there who had his leg amputated below the knee. So walking is still hard. Don't get me wrong, it's still hard. But if you've got a knee there, you can still technically walk. When it's above the knee, you have to learn to walk completely different. It's all with your hip. It's a whole new. It's basically you learn to walk again. And my dad was up and walking within 3 months of having his leg taken off. And the other guy, unfortunately, never did walk. He just didn't have that determination. And the more they told my dad that, all right, fine, you're able to kind of get around a bit now, but you'll not drive. That's the next thing my dad was like, oh, fuck yeah, I'm going to do that. So then, again, he pushed on. He automatic car, learned to drive with his left leg, which was kangaroos at times, stop start as we were going along. But he did that. He then went back to work and things like that. So watching this and seeing that, there's a bit where Christopher says, it's unfortunate I had to have the accident and become paralyzed to realize what I've missed in my family. And then he learned to kind of, have all this time. And he says he learned to teach Will how to ride a bike just by talking to him. All these things that he realized that he was missing beforehand. And, my eldest, I said to him when I'm talking about this, he says, Dad, whatever you do not cry on the podcast. Because I've been in flooded tears several times watching this. There was a few times I thought, no, no, it's fine. But then, especially near the back end, I was just, sat there and it's just wiping your eyes and thinking, oh, God, because certain things just take you back and you go back in that moment and you're like, oh, I remember being with my dad when he took his last breath. So there's certain things that pull you back, but it's amazing to see what he did and see the fact that yes, I am disabled now, but that doesn't have to make me. I can make something. And what he went on to do and what he went on to fight to do and what he used, the fame and the fortune that he did have to be able to kind of improve so many people's lives. There is unfortunately there's a lady near the end of the documentary, Brooke Ellis,
Brooke Ellis, I think, yeah.
and that he brought her in. They did a film about her, and they kind of did a big thing. Unfortunately, I think it was weeks after the showing of this at Sundance, she passed away. But she got to see this. She got to see herself on screen. She got to see that she was part of this. And this is what makes him Superman, because for all the crap that he had a lot of money and fame and things like that, but that helped to a certain degree. But him having that kind of inner strength to do what he did afterwards is what made him Superman, and what we kind of recognize and why we call him Superman.
It's an interesting sort of it's interesting how he approached this documentary. So to hear your two stories, it's an honor, and to and I'm sort of like a little bit of a clamped of like you're saying, oh, this is how it approaches for you guys. I have a very different story. My my dad's still around, and we've had our ups and downs and stuff, but we have a different relationship. And I think one of the things that sort of I took from this, and it sort of hit me, was how easy it is to take things for granted, and how easy it can be to sort of see the grass is greener, especially in his younger days. That thing of when he was with his first partner and living in London, and he's traveling to America, and then he literally comes home back to London, and it's like, this isn't going to work. And I don't think he means with her. He's like, because it's quickly followed by an interview, and they sort of say, well, what is it you want? And he said, well, I wouldn't mind a hit move. And you can see that he's obviously become ambitious, and he wants to be a part of the Hollywood, the Hollywood set. And it never goes into like, there's no, you mentioned about Glenn Close is sort of like, I know there's other rumors and stuff like that, but like, it never really gets into the sort of like the weeds or the real dirt of it. But it's there where you're like, oh, he clearly left thinking, not so much I have something better, but that's what I want. I want to be a part of it, and I have to be in Los Angeles or New York to do it. And that felt kind of like, disappointing to me. I saw it and I'm like, this feels disappointing. And I sort of reflect on myself, and I'm like, we do these podcasts and I do the writing and stuff like that. And there's like, my daughter's just turned 12, and there is that moment I'm like, yeah, there was a moment especially when you said about the teaching his kid to ride a bike, or teaching Will to ride a bike as he's talking to him, and there was like, my daughter's turning into a youth as I watch, and I'm like, how much longer do I have when I can have those moments that are going to be with my daughter and that my little girl kind of thing. So it hit me then. I was like, you're right, you don't want to miss those chances, because accidents happen and these things happen. It can easily be taken away from you quite quickly. And so it's interesting how this documentary can talk to you. And it does talk to you. It really does. And I think one of the things you say about Robin Williams, and I'm a massive Robin Williams fan, and that's Robin Williams, by the way, not Robbie Williams. I want to be clear for anyone listening. Robin Williams is huge in this, and you see his presence. And one of the things that sort of there's several documentaries, and there's a fantastic biography about him, about this period. It's because his life. I've read about this period where this kind of really knocked Robin as well. And there's the scene, there's the he sort of says, he says when he first went to see Christopher Reeve in hospital, and he says, "Oh, he was still a little bit out of it, and he wasn't sure if so he went in as a Russian proctologist and was like making all the jokes." And there's more to that story where he wasn't really sure. Like, people were sort of saying to Robin, like, he's like this is what's happened, and he was really uncertain. And it was somebody else, I think it was Dana Reeve at the time, just said, just go speak to your friend. And that's what he did. And he kind of sort of realised that sort of these people, for all their sort of what they face, they are just people. You put like Christopher Reeve on a pedestal, you put Robin Williams on a pedestal, and you sort of think that's rightfully so. But they are just, the man part of this is kind of more important than the super.
And there's a great thing with the trust that they kind of, the Christopher and Diane Reeves trust, that is it trust? I think that they kind of built. And
the foundation.
The foundation, sorry. At first, it was just Christopher Reeve's foundation, and they had a lot of backlash for when he was saying, "Look, how do we treat this disability?" And people, my dad was disabled, my mum's disabled as well, unfortunately. Disabled doesn't. Although you are disabled, that doesn't make you
less.
And like the backlash was very much, not all of us want to be treated. Some of us are happy how we are.
It was the cure, wasn't it? That was the big thing.
Yeah, and Diana's like, okay, then how do we make your lives better?
Yeah.
And the thing, even though this great thing that they'd set up, there were still faults there. And then they realised, well, hang on, if we pivot this and we can turn it, we can actually improve and make people's lives better by understanding, what people are going through. But I think that's a major thing. And you do look back and you do, reflect on certain things, like you say. Maybe I should put the phone down and spend a bit more time with, my kids and my wife and what have you, because you don't know where that next accident could be. There's a scene in I won't spoil it, but there's a scene in Thunderbolts with US agent, and you kind of watch that and you think, how many of us have been guilty at points of, well, we've done that a little bit, and that, Christopher Reeves kind of points it out. He says, I've missed so much out, and it wasn't until I had the accident that I realised that I'm missing out. When when Matthew was born, I think he said the day afterwards, he wasn't there for the birth. He went skiing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like, so I wonder whether maybe at the start, a bit of it was kind of like, I'm a dad, I've got the one married, but, I've got a partner, I've ticked that box, but I still want to kind of have the single life with my friends and do all the other stuff.
Not willing to compromise. I think that was a big part of Reeve before the accident, was and that's I think why his obsession with the cure as opposed to really the treatment, in a sense, adjusting to your new life. He had tunnel vision of, we're going to cure this. And he did the controversial advert and stuff. And it's like, I'm going to get out of this because in a way, and he says it in the documentary, he's like, or someone says it about him, where it's like, he always, when he went and met some people who had these disabilities when he was, before he had the accident, he was like, I don't like being in there because once I get out, I can be my normal self again. And then when he actually has the accident, he's like, well, how can I get out of this situation? Rather than how can I adjust to this new life? He's like, not necessarily as overtly horrible as this, but like, how can I get out of this? I'm better than this. Yeah. I shouldn't be here. I'm better than this. And I think that we were saying, like, once the foundation becomes, as opposed to just Christopher, when it's sort of Dana and Christopher, when it's the two of them, and as you say, when after he passes Dana, or towards the end, she really turns it into more of, right, let's not hyper focus on the cure. Let's also try and make things more handicap accessible. Let's have more things like this, more funding for these people. Yeah, let's have the research for these things, but also some of the equipment they have to use. Rather than just spending all the money on the cure that may not come, let's spend the money on people being more comfortable. How do we do these things? And I really liked that balance where you've got the super/man almost, the two parts of his life. But I do like that Dana really did get her time, especially towards the end, of showing like she was really a massive part. I think even Matthew says when Reeve married her,
Mm.
he actually saw his dad way more because
Mm.
when she met the two kids from the prior relationship, she was going, you need to spend time with the kids. She was inviting them to family gatherings. She was always like, I'm not going to be the stepmom, I'm going to be their friend. And how, the mum of them was really appreciative of that. And saying all these things of like, she really forced Christopher to actually be a more of a present dad rather than being that single man who has kids.
Yeah.
Which again, is a very human story and there's a lot to sort of learn from it.
I think, yeah, and I want to sort of focus on, I think the two things to sort of pivot onto the next part is this mentality, and you said they did the advert after his accident, and they have this sort of like computer, animated advert of Christopher Reeve getting out of his wheelchair and walking and shaking the guy's hand, and that was what sort of generated the backlash.
That's what kicked it all off. Yeah.
Yeah, that, and I think it was like 96, 97, 98, I can't remember when that is, but there's a point that when that advert is done. But what I think is, and this is that sort of thing of, I think there's a guy that says he hadn't fully grieved for what he had lost to be able to move on, and I think that's a very sort of interesting point. Sort of, I think that grieving process though is different for different people, as we all know. Grief is different for different people and for different losses. But one of the things that Christopher Reeve, as you sort of recognise him as, he was Superman, he was incredibly athletic, he was incredibly competitive, he was incredibly sort of like, on the go constantly. To me, that's almost like there's like an athlete's mentality, right? And that's not to differentiate. Also, that's what I'm trying to say. It's like a competitive athlete. When you hear when Triple H ripped his quad, right? And they're like, you're never going to wrestle again. And then within like a year, he's back. And he's like, no. What we got to do? How do we do it? I'm going to get it like surgically attached to the bone, and then I'm going to do all this stuff, and I'm going to work even harder. And it's just sort of like there's kind of that mentality of like, as you sort of said, not accepting the new reality. Now that may sometimes, and we kind of applaud that. And that's one of the things I find that's, I'm not saying, I don't know whether it's ableist or not, but we kind of applaud it, don't we? We'll be like, this is the injury that they have, but now they're back. You see it in sports all the time. Someone's like, they did this and they shattered this bone, but now they're back. They tore their quadricep or they tore their pectoral muscle, but now they're back. Like, we see it almost as like an underdog story. It's like, oh, they got injured and now they've returned. And so to have that and to be lauded as Superman and to be so incredibly active, like, I can see that his pinpoint focus would have been, and I'm coming back.
I think there's a point that say what's the hardest thing since the accident is we're going from being a participant to an observer.
Yeah.
And it is right. He didn't. I mean, I'm going to be not too gruesome, but a little bit gruesome. One of the things my dad said that really helped him with losing his leg was when he was laid on the operating table. They're not sedating him; they just numbed him. They're basically giving him an epidural.
Mm.
So he was well awake whilst they took his leg off, and he was laid in a way that the shining lights above him was obviously mirrored. He could see what was going on.
Oof.
Now most people would look away, and my dad didn't, and he saw them take it off and take it away, and he said that to a certain degree, seeing that had gone helped him understand the fact that this was no longer part of him.
Mm.
And he accepted it a lot easier. He still felt it. The worst thing was itchy toes and not being able to itch them. But, it was an acceptance of, right, this is gone now. What do we do next? And how do we move forward? And I think that's the thing that Christopher at the start, he just thought, well, that's not my life. I'm, like you say, it's that athletics kind of vibe. I'll just train hard and I'll get back. We do see right near the end that he does start to move. He moves his fingers and his thumb, and his legs start to move to a certain degree. I think that was one of the hardest parts when, after kind of all that rehabilitation, and he's talking with the doctor, and the doctor says, the problem is you can't breathe on your own. Your muscles have it's been
Atrophy.
6 years.
Yeah.
They can't hack it. And for all that work that he's just done and gone through, and it's like, yeah, but unfortunately your body's still saying no. It's heartbreaking, and again, it kind of puts him back a bit. But I do think that, it was that thing for him that he then did start to accept, well, this is how I am. So how do I make a better life, not just for me, but for everyone else around me?
Yeah.
I did wonder, and I often think about these things because, being a nerd and a bit of an idiot. If you had time travel and you could go back to say like that the day before he jumps on that horse in '94, and you would say, "Don't go tomorrow." If you could stop Christopher Reeve from getting on that horse, and I was thinking about this during that second half of this documentary, and I'm like, and then there's actually a point at the moment you sort of realise that, what is the sliding doors moment, the what if. Let's keep it, the else world. Let's keep it really in on brand. There's an else world where that accident didn't happen. I mean, even as his son, I think it's Matthew, actually says, like, 6 inches the other way, and it's a stupid fumble he gets up and walks away from.
Yeah, but no, it was an inch the other way. He
Yeah,
gets
so
up,
yeah,
an inch the other way to the right, he's dead.
yeah. But let's
So
say in the else
it was
world,
just
like,
that.
yeah, and that's it. It's a stupid. It was one of those twists of fate. But like, so that inch the other way, and he gets up, brushes himself off, and carries on. There's a part of me that thinks, well, yes, he'll be remembered as Superman, but I don't think there'll be any more Superman films. Does he then become like, a TV actor? Is it? Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like, what is it that he sort of contributes? This accident, it's kind of like it's a tragedy, but the benefits to the world of it sounds awful to say it, but the benefits, the greater benefits that you've now got the Dana and Christopher Reeve Foundation, which is, supporting, hundreds of thousands of people all over the world. You kind of sort of go, okay, well, no, there's a selfishness to sort of having to stop in that accident. Do you know what I mean? It's like, this is the most tragic, but also the better future we live in because of it.
Matthew does say that he remembers coming home at some point. His dad just sat there and he was just doing yet another TV movie
Mm.
just to pay the bills.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that would have been his future,
Mm.
unless he'd have gone back and put the cape back on again, which you get to a certain point where he wouldn't be able to do it anymore. He just wouldn't have the aesthetics to be able to do it.
No.
I think he would have done for Superman. I feel like Superman Returns would have been with him, but I think that it would have been slated. I think you'd have got to an old man, and I think with this generation, if he was still alive today, he would then be held in a massive, amazing regard, and he'd get like a Comic-Con renaissance, like so many things do.
Yeah.
But I think of those things because when my dad passed away when I was 19, it's the anchor point in my life, and I always say, on Genuine Chit Chat, I've said it many many times, but I say it's the worst thing that's ever happened to me, but the best thing that's ever happened to my person. It completely changed everything about my life. It made me really reconsider so many elements of. I wouldn't be podcasting, to be honest, if Dad hadn't passed away. I don't think I wouldn't have moved out when I did, which is, Mum wanted to sell the house. She wanted a fresh start, which I get. So I moved out after a year, moved in with a couple of mates of mine. Partied quite hard for a few years, but also, the second long-term relationship I had ever had was, when Dad was ill. A year and a half with a woman who was the daughter of my mum's old school friend, and they reconnected because Dad was ill. He did a charity gig for cancer because he used to play in bands quite a lot. And then I dated this person for 18 months. That affected elements of where I moved to, who I moved in with, things like that. Then who I dated after that, and consequently, eventually, obviously with Megan now. Yeah, and Megan and I, like, we met because I was on Tinder and a few other apps and etc. Kind of vaguely. I wasn't like hyper focusing, but I was kind of on them a little bit. And she reinstalled it randomly on one day, and I was one of the few swipes. And it just so happened she messaged me immediately. And back nearly 10 years ago, more often than not, men would have to message first. She messaged me immediately. I was already talking to someone else, but I was lukewarm on them. She messaged. I met her in like 2 days. We clicked really well, and the rest is history. And I often think, I was like, if I went back in time and told Dad earlier about his cancer and he got it treated and got it cured, I wouldn't be with Megan. I almost certainly wouldn't be podcasting. And if I hadn't been podcasting, some of my best friends, obviously you two came to my wedding party. I wouldn't have had the wedding party. I wouldn't have met, a decent chunk. I'd probably say half of my closest friends now are from podcasting. The most of my personal growth has come from either my dad passing away and having to really look introspectively, and then also doing podcasting, listening to how I talk to people and edit it and go, I interrupt people too much. I don't listen enough. I talk about myself too much in the wrong ways. And I have to edit that and listen to myself. And it really made me grow as a person, especially, I've been doing this for nearly 10 years, formative years, in the early 20s. So I often think about that idea of if I could go back and save my dad, it would be nice to have dad around, but also, and I think this documentary very lightly touches upon it, which is, I'm not going to ask you this directly, Maff, because it's not my business, but like, I found when dad passed away, I found out a lot about his dirty laundry that I didn't know about when he was around. And I don't know how much of that, if that came out, if I'd have ever found that out, if, I would have hoped him and mum would have been together forever. But he was with his last wife for a very similar amount of time, and there was, let's see, this is common knowledge, but like the first wife he cheated on with my mum. There were rumors that he may have not been fully faithful to my mum. And it's like, if that have happened, who knows, in a few years' time, that marriage could have broken down. He could have gotten do you know what I mean? So there's all these things that one thinks about. Now my dad is kind of framed in this way that he was a great man. He was very flawed, but that was it. He had some flaws. He didn't destroy my family. He didn't do these things. And I wonder if Christopher Reeve, although he did the charity work, just from the lens of seeing what he was like with his kids, especially with Matthew, is like, had he still been able, would the second marriage have broken down? Would he have had yet another family? And would he have really had a trail? Because he had the reputation before he met Dana, I think.
Yes.
So I thought about it with that lens of myself as well, which is, when someone passes away, the story in a way kind of stops, unless they've done something horrendous. Generally speaking, they get looked upon with slightly more positive eyes, and if negative stuff comes out, it doesn't have the same effect, which I think is an interesting thing to consider with someone who wasn't, Superman.
I mean, I went off to the Navy in my young years. I was in my 20s. We were talking with my mum at one point. I found out my dad wasn't doing very well and he was struggling. And my mum was a bit concerned, and to the point where she thought that he wouldn't be able to work anymore. I paid myself out and I left the Navy to come to work. I worked with my dad, and years later, I'm now on my own. It's a weird thing that as it turns out, when I came back, actually, Dad wasn't as bad as what he is what my mum really thought it was, and he probably would have managed. But at the same, and I also felt quite guilty. I kind of thought, oh well, I've let you down now. And he said, you could sweep the streets, and I'd still be proud of you. So he said it didn't matter what I did, whether I was in the Navy, whether I worked at McDonald's, whether I did a milk round, but whatever I did, he would still be proud of me. But it is a strange thing, because if I'd never left, I would never have met Amanda. I would never have the 3 kids I've got. It's that thing. I may not even be here. I could have been off to a war-torn area and I wouldn't be around. So it is a strange, if you could go back and go, hang on a minute, you don't need to leave, or hang on a minute, Dad, maybe you should go get checked. Because unfortunately, when my dad found out that he had cancer, it was in his lymph nodes, it was in his bones, it was pretty brutal. I think he found out, this is where I'm going to try and hold myself back. He found out 3 days before me and Amanda got married. So we got married. I knew there was something wrong. And it wasn't until the day after we got married, he told us what happened. And that was in June. Yes, June. In September, he passed away. So it was very quick and that. But if we'd have found out earlier and he could have got treated, again, would that change things? Would, yes, unfortunately, as 10 years has gone on, my mum has opened up an awful lot and told me a lot of stuff about my dad, which is certain things. It's like, oof. don't know if I needed to know this, Mum, but at the same point, I think a lot of it is so she can get it off her chest, and she can kind of, well, to be fair, you're now the man. You have to kind of deal with these things, and it is that thing that I do appreciate that. I do know my dad a lot better now, even the flaws. And to me, my dad was kind of a Superman to me, but he was still very flawed. And the thing is, I know I'm not the best dad. I do my best, but I'm not the best. I make mistakes. I do things wrong. We always do, but we always can try and learn from that and try to do better at that. And again, you don't always get it right and that, but as long as you can see that you need to try change things. And I think that's one of the things with this document. You can see that he did try to change things and it did make a difference. And it is that thing of, unfortunately, if you did have that prior knowledge, but you also knew the amount of people that he saved and he helped, would you keep quiet? And I think you would have to say yes.
Yeah.
I agree.
No, I think that's the conclusion I sort of came to. I mean, more so, there's the scene, a short scene where he is in hospital. I think he's sort of still very early on, and he's come off the ventilator. Or he's off the big ventilator, so he's able to move and stuff. And there's a young boy who's really struggling to come off the ventilator and has basically given up. And he goes in and talks to him and sort of like, look, we'll do it together. You can do it, kind of thing. And so, you're right. It's one of those. It's one of those things of sort of miracles coming out of tragedy, isn't it?
That one of the defining factors. I think that what Diana said to him when she said, "Look, you're still you, and I still love you."
That line. There's two moments. Like, she clearly loved him, and their love is incredibly sort of well presented. And but like that thing of "I love you, you're still you." That's one of the moments where you're just like, I've got to pause this a second. I've got to take a breath.
Like, hang on a minute.
And then to find
I'll
out
just have a drink.
That's it, yeah. And then to find out when he was passing and stuff, and she basically like barged her way into the room to shouting, "I love you, I love you, I love you," so to make sure it's the last thing he heard.
That's what got me. That was a bit
Yeah.
when that was happening. I was like, because I've got that thoughts of just like someone holding on until that last person can say it's. I mean, makes you think a little bit of Endgame actually. Where Pepper says to Tony Stark, "It's okay, we're safe now. You can go. You've held on. You're allowed to pass on now." And it's like with my dad went to a hospice, so I haven't got to say goodbye really. But last thing I ever said to my dad was, "I love you." It was the morning of. I went to work. I was still living at home, and then he passed away that evening. I saw him in the hospice when he was sort of barely alive, when he wasn't really responsive to people, and then left for a little bit. Mum was still there. And then we got the phone call, and it's like those little moments, and that's what really got me. It's just like someone hanging on, just so person can say "I love you" or goodbye, or knowing it's okay for that tiny last part of you just to let go and go to whatever's next.
Yeah.
The day my dad passed away was Wednesday, and I'd worked that morning. I remember getting done, washing up, showering, going round to see my dad, and getting there, and we were sat on bed, and I holding his hand, and I remember him saying to me, he says, "Is everything sorted?" Because we'd been sorting out paperwork out, and it's like, "Yeah, everything's done, Dad. Don't have to worry about anything." And he said, "Right, get your mum." My mum came in, my sister came in, Amanda was there, and I remember holding his hand, and that final breath, and we was all there for it. And again, that bit of "I love you, I love you, I love you," it just got me, because one of the hardest things with that final breath, and that you all hold your breath thinking, "Come on, there's something else," and there isn't anything. And again, it makes you realise how much you have, and you have to really appreciate it, and that, because things can just go and change just so quickly.
Whether it's an accident or an illness or what it is, it's just this film I think is a real perfect show of like perspective change. I think that's the big lesson from this is like, and I think that's what Reeve says at one point. He's like, I really wish it didn't take me to this accident to realize, what you guys kind of said, to realize what was important. And I think, my dad was a lot more affectionate to my brothers. He used to tell me he loved me quite a lot, but like my brothers, he said he loved them to his brothers and to my brothers and hugged them a lot more post diagnosis more than any other time. And I think it's one of those where I feel like this is such an important documentary for people to watch, not just to know the story of Superman and to know, show more light on people with paralysis and things, but to really go, as we've all kind of touched upon, is try not to have a perspective change and realize it's the moments in life that matter. It's not necessarily these giant achievements. It's the little moments that you remember, when you teach a kid how to ride a bike, or you get that first smile from a newborn or whatever, like all these little things. It's the moments that you think about when you are about to go to whatever's next. And I think that's what really touches me on this. You've got those two sort of corresponding stories, but it's the perspective shift. That's what I really took away from this.
I think I'm gonna shift the gear, and I want, but more than anything, before we do, I want to say thank you for sharing, your stories. I wasn't expecting this to go here. To be honest,
it's just coincidence that me and Maff happened to be on the same pod, and we've both had very similar experiences with our respective dads as well.
But to both of you, thank you for so beautifully sharing and articulating it, because it's it's honoured to hear it, and it's affected me. So I'll keep it. But I'm gonna shift it back to nerd, just to
do it.
Really bring it back in.
Talk about Superman, the comic Superman, not the real life Superman. That's the comic nerdy stuff.
what I do want to talk about actually is the burden of Superman. So I'm not going full funny, but we're gonna go. But I do. What I was fascinated by with this thing is, and it got me onto this idea of actors that hit a role and then are kind of pasted with that role,
typecasted with it.
Exactly.
Tony Stark, Robert Downey Jr.
But he's kind of turned that into
his advantage, really.
He has. True. To me, I went the other way, and I was thinking like Mark Hamill kind of struggled in the 90s very much because he's sort of
Carrie Fisher as well.
Carrie Fisher, Leonard Nimoy, like literally wrote a book that was called "I'm Not Spock" to really hammer it home. And you can see it in this though that he loved play. You can see that, especially for the first two. Let's at least acknowledge the first two. There is a joy in being Superman. Like it was a big break for him. He was doing off Broadway. Like Jeff Daniels and Whoopi Goldberg, like all these people he knew as he was coming up, and they're all like, "Yeah, do it." Like I love the fact that James Hurt
that was like,
great.
Jeff
through
Daniels.
You, yeah.
William Hurt was saying,
William Hurt.
Do not do this. It will be a travesty. You go against everything that we think. And Jeff
is that Thunderbolt Ross, William Hurt, by any chance? Is that? Oh, all right, cool. Yeah, stuck to his principles there, didn't he?
Well, it's him as I don't remember the guy, but the guy who was teaching him this is, look, you stay true to your form. That unless they offer you a lot of money.
Oh yeah. Unless they pay you a ton of money, you do it.
But that's right. That's what he's there to do.
What's interesting though is he clearly starts to. If I've watched several other Christopher Reeve films, ironically, just before we were starting, we were talking about John Carpenter because Dan's doing the Invisible Man. I kind of like him in Village of the Damned, which comes in '92, I think. And he's good in that. Is Christopher Reeve. I've also watched what's it called? A What's It in Time, where he literally sort of uses hypnosis to go back in time to meet this woman. So it's a romance sci-fi film. It's kind of good. It introduced me to the concept of the bootstrap paradox, because he gets given a watch that he uses to hypnotize, and then he takes it back with him, gives it to the woman, and she gives it to him, which starts the film. And so there's this paradox of this watch going back around in time.
Oh yeah,
it's a really cool idea, and it's a very romantic film. But he was clearly trying to play against, like, I'm not just Superman, I can do all these other things. He was obviously doing the plays. I've got a list here of other films that he turned down.
Ooh.
And this is interesting. So American Gigolo, which I think went to Swayze?
No, Dustin Hoffman? Didn't he do it?
Let's check.
No,
Richard Gere.
Richard Gere, sorry, yeah.
The World According to Garp, which went to Robin Williams. Weirdly enough. Splash, which was
Tom
Hanks.
Yeah.
Fatal Attraction, opposite, as we've mentioned, Glenn Close.
Yeah.
And that went to Michael Douglas. Here's the interesting one. Oh, then the other one, Romancing the Stone, that also went to Michael Douglas. An underappreciated film. Here's the interesting one, Lethal Weapon.
Oh.
He was offered the Martin Riggs role.
He could have been, because his comedy timing is it's hard to see him with a mullet.
Yeah.
But it depends if he would want to, because again, one of the impressions, I think ego played quite a big role in this documentary, but I think one of the elements is kind of, do you want to be the kind of actor like DiCaprio or Daniel Day-Lewis, kind of like, I'm an actor, I do this, I do not do superhero movies, I do not do silly stuff? Or do you want to be more of the kind of person who's just kind of thankful to be in movies? The really far end is like Danny Trejo, who will be in anything. You've kind of got, which I love, anytime Danny Trejo's in, I'm like, I don't care if the film's good, if he's in it, that's all good fun. But like, you've got the two ends of acting. I know Danny Trejo is very, very, very famous. There's a lot of sort of people less famous than Danny Trejo who work in a lot of movies and things. But it is, I mean, Samuel L. Jackson's a good thing. He's in everything. If you know a film's got Samuel L. Jackson in, that has no impact on whether or not you want to watch the film, because he's in everything. But I wonder if he'd have ever had that. I don't know if he'd ever have had that learning moment of going, I sometimes just need to almost take the L, take the lose to go on this film I'm kind of turning my nose up to, because so many actors, they go, oh yeah, I wasn't even going to do this film. And it becomes like this cult classic, and it becomes massive, and it launches their career.
Star Wars.
Or even,
say again? Star Wars.
Yeah, of course. Star Wars, yeah, Mark Hamill, obviously he had that, and Harrison Ford, etc. But like, or you do get certain things, and they mention it in sort of Schitt's Creek, which is sometimes you get people who like, they're in a cult movie, certain film festivals, I know John Hammond goes to them, and all you need to be is one really good or sometimes really bad horror film. And really, if you do maybe a couple of sequels here and there, do a few other parts, you can often make a career of just going to conventions, maybe involved in a few documentaries, maybe producing a couple of things, off of one or two roles that you thought, instead of having all this weight of being this big actor, you can actually have these little roles that can actually mean a lot, and you can have a really fulfilling life going to cons and meeting fans who love you for being in this really weird movie. I don't know if he'd ever done that.
Career.
No.
Well, Bruce Campbell, Juicy Brucey.
Yeah, Bruce Campbell is
100%.
prime example. But again, I think Bruce Campbell is very much like Robert Downey Jr. Like, he turned it to his advantage, and was like, the Bruce Campbell that we know is Bruce Campbell's not an actor. Bruce Campbell is a B movie actor. Is a B movie star. Like, you don't hire Bruce Campbell to play, quiet librarian do you know what I mean? In like Remains of the Day. Like, he's not playing against Anthony Hopkins. Like, you hire Bruce Campbell to be Bruce Campbell. Like with Robert Downey Jr. You hire Robert Downey Jr. to be Robert Downey Jr. A bit like Tom Cruise, there's a certain actors you go, well, it's like with Arnie, like, you hired Arnie to be Arnie, like,
Arnie was down to, he wanted to be Superman.
Yeah, they say this documentary, which would have been the worst thing I could have possibly imagined.
Yeah, I love the guys, the guy who does the impressions, very good. But I think that's the thing, and like, you say this sort of thing of like, but Christopher Reeve was an actor. Like, he wanted to take it seriously. He'd come from RADA. He'd done all the Broadway. Like, he was very much about the physicality, which is, plays well for the physical comedy of the Clark Kent moments. And I can see him looking at some of those roles, especially like Lethal Weapon, and going, that's not what I want to do. However, if you've ever seen Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back.
Yes.
Which is a really weird reference to be sort of making. But there's a scene in that where Matt Damon and Ben Affleck are sort of starring in Good Will Hunting 2.
Yeah.
And they make the joke about, you do one film for the cash, and then you do the fruity, as Ben Affleck calls it, the fruity art piece. And because they're arguing about it, and sort of like, that's the thing, isn't it? Like, sometimes you've got to take the films to pay the bills, or you to progress your career, and then you'll get the film to do things. The irony is, of course, for Reeve, that's sort of what happened with 4. He did 4 so he could get, and I forget the name of the film. It's based like a news reporter story. I've not seen it. It's got I was gonna say a young Morgan Freeman in it. Morgan Freeman's never been young. The dude was born at like
Him and Michael Caine, they've always just
yeah, yeah, they've always been old. So he had that opportunity, but I again that what if, like, you know, there's that moment you go, if he'd have taken that with a role, like, would he have tanked? You know, regardless of Mel Gibson being Mel Gibson, um, there's an energy that he brings to that film, and with him and Danny Glover, where you're like, that's the Lethal Weapon pairing, and that's how it works out. Like, it would have been very different, I think, with Christopher Reeve. So yeah, I don't know. There is an oddities where I do think, you know, if he'd have taken slightly different roles, his career could have been much more successful in the 80s.
yeah. I
At
wonder
the
if he
same
had this.
point, do you think that maybe getting Superman so early
Mm-hmm.
also maybe affected him as well? Because he kind of came into a role, and they said that they wanted an unknown actor to do this, and then have a load of well-known actors around him to build him up. Maybe getting the role and having this amount of fame that he did get, that he kind of thought, oh, well, I'm bigger than what I actually am. And then not having to I mean, I'm sure he did do plays and things and, kind of had to work hard for it. I mean, there's a music bit where it's like Robin Williams is like, oh, look, it's Superman and Popeye. Get out of the way, Popeye. And that the kind of the differences between them there, the fact that, one is just such a high, Superman is just this massive star. And that Popeye within its own reasons, yeah, that's fine, but it's not the big thing that what Superman is. So maybe he hit high too quickly, and really the only way is to go down.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I do think that earliness, because it was his first big role. He was off Broadway, and he got sort of offered this, and it made me think of other actors that were very young, and I'd say like Mark Hamill with Luke Skywalker, and I was thinking of others that I was trying to think of others that have, like, you know, when you
peaked
see,
early sort of thing. But like
yeah,
the first film is so unbelievably massive. You
yes,
literally cannot ever get a film that big. It's just not possible. I mean, you think about, in the 70s, that was the birth of the summer blockbuster.
mm,
Jaws was the first. You had Superman. You had Star Wars. Those are three of the biggest films and cultural references of all time. And also all three of them have got scored by John Williams of the psychotic music. Coincidence.
But I think this is where sort of, I think, as you say, Matt, about what you choose to do after. And I think, for Harrison Ford, for example, I think Harrison Ford saved, some people believe, because of Indiana Jones.
Yes.
Slightly, Tom Selleck couldn't do it, and George Lucas and Steven Spielberg were like, let's have a quick chat with Harrison, see what he's doing. And I think that allowed him to sort of diverge enough to go off and do other things. Um, and so I think that, but when we look at actors that we have seen have had longevity and think, and can then do different things. We said about Nick Cage being Superman at some point, with the Superman death. If you ever see the life and death of Superman, the sort of document, that's a fascinating one to watch as well. Is that like Nick Cage paid his dues? Like, he came up through like indie films, and he's a bit of a nepo baby, but proved his worth, and then sort of was able to go off and do, action films and Leaving Las Vegas and all those kinds of things. And so you go sort of Nick Cage becomes Nick Cage, but the same with like Arnie and Stallone and others. You see, they have this sort of like, oh, there's a legacy of crap they've had to go through to get to before they become the star. And I think that's sort of with Reeve, he got it, as you say, and becomes this sort of, and then all of a sudden he's so sort of associated with Superman that there's nothing else. There's no other thing that you go, oh, but I also saw you in blah, or I've seen this. He kind of had to forge that path afterwards. And I think it's the same for Hamill, isn't it, really? When you sort of go, there's nothing for him to sort of latch onto. And I think he obviously, but the difference being Hamill then made a career through other things like voice work and
Yeah.
Tapping into other bits and pieces, which
I think it's a hard one, is it? Because I think, unfortunately, with Star Wars, the sequels, actually, Star Wars, even the prequels. I mean, Ewan McGregor, he went off. Ewan McGregor's Ewan McGregor. Yeah, I was introduced to him as Obi-Wan But I see Ewan McGregor's Ewan McGregor because, favorite film ever is Trainspotting, which is a very, very different film. I know he did that first, but he did those roles beforehand. Hayden Christensen, there's probably the only other film I think anyone can name he's in is Jumper. And that's it.
He's
Star
a good
Wars.
example. He's a good example.
And I think modern day, it's probably going to be Daisy Ridley, unfortunately, because she's a good actor. You see her in other stuff. She's good, but most of the films she's been in have tanked. However, you see John Boyega and stuff, he does pretty well, and also he was shafted quite a lot in the sequels. But Oscar Isaac is not Poe Dameron. He is the character, but you think Oscar Isaac, you don't think, you think Daisy Ridley, you go,
he's Moon Knight.
He's Moon Knight, or you think, he's that, or he's oh god, let's not talk about that. Probably the only time he's ever been he's only bad in a film. But I think of him, he's in Ex Machina is probably my first or second favorite film of all time. So I was going to use that example. He has done that, and I think conversely, you've got Elijah Wood and Daniel Radcliffe, especially Daniel Radcliffe. You got Frodo, and you've got Harry Potter. They've spent the last sort of 10, maybe 20 years now they were like, we've got a big paycheck for these big franchises. Let's do all these really, really weird indie films. Swiss Army Man is crazy and things like that, where I think that you have to do it in a certain way. And I think if almost the era he was in of Reeves, I think that if Superman had happened almost when Batman had happened, I think he probably would have had that thing because he could have gone to voice acting. I know Hamill was around the same time anyway, but I think he could have gotten to voice acting or he could have done that. Yeah. But also Hamill did do some TV work and a few little bits and pieces of film. He knew where the camera was. Whereas Reeve, I think linking on with what you said, Maff, is he was an off-Broadway actor. Then he immediately does one of the biggest films of all time. So his learning of how to interact with the camera is from Superman and Gene Hackman and Marlon Brando and stuff. Whereas a lot of other people, they at least had some experience of other stuff first. And so I think that also plays a role as well. And the character that Superman is, he said in the documentary, women were just throwing themselves at him. Absolutely. And, even if you've got a strong will, and even if we say he never cheated on his first partner, even if he didn't, it's still like a really difficult thing, just even the most grounded person to comprehend of every person viewing you through the lens of arguably the most moral person who's ever lived outside of biblical figures.
Well, the biblical thing, he said he actually had religious leaders sending him letters, especially Christian, saying, you are now the personification of sort of morality on earth. He's going no, I'm an actor in a blue suit. This is, do not get me completely affiliated with the role. And I think you're right. I think that's a big part of this problem.
And it being the first superhero as well.
I don't know if it's Richard Donner or Paris Bengal. One of them was saying it's like the bit when he first flew, and he banks.
Donner says it,
and it's like he got that because he flew, because he's from the Atlantic twice on his own, and that. Because he had that knowledge, so that was something he could bring into this. But like you say, there were things outside that he was able to bring because he knew about it. But actually learning the trade as such, he's missed all that. So he does expect that he is this big star and he can go off to do Playboy mansions and things like that. Because not that I'm saying that he did do it, I don't know if he did.
It happens with music, doesn't it? Because you think of when you get someone, you get a lot of music we all like is rock, alternative stuff. And it's kind of, I had that when I was growing up a bit pop music, pop idol, that sort of stuff. And I'd be jaded about it because you've never spent a decade playing clubs, writing music, struggling with this music you're passionate about and finally making a break compared to someone. And, Justin Bieber's been through the ringer. Don't get me wrong. He's had a very tough time of it, especially with stuff. But with someone like him who basically came out of nowhere, did a few covers on YouTube, got picked up by Ludacris, and then releases Baby, which is the biggest song ever for that period. And then he shot into a level of stardom that is just completely incomprehensible. It is with music, you get it. You don't know how to deal with it. You don't know how, you're not equipped with the tools of dealing with fame, which is why a lot of child actors also go down very dark.
A lot of Disney Club actors,
Disney is notorious for it.
And Nickelodeon.
Okay. I've just done kids' TV for so long. Right, okay. Give me the dirtiest role you can give me, just so I can, shake
Miley Cyrus, Zendaya. A lot of them have to go, right, you saw me as a child for this.
Drew Barrymore.
They all have to do these roles to try and do it, and he never got that opportunity.
No. And Macaulay Culkin I think is the prime example. Like, I don't want to allegedly his relationship with Michael Jackson. But also like he literally divorced his parents because they spent his fortune.
Yeah.
So, you see these kind of like the dues being paid or the tragedy that can happen of these things, and you sort of feel it. But I also see, you see it today. You said about like Daisy Ridley, and I think you're right. I think the Curse of Star Wars, it's going to be her curse. I think she's going to end up in Midsummer Murders within a couple of years. Although she's got her own Star Wars film, hasn't she? Got another one coming at some
There's
point.
something coming out in there.
Yeah, it's going to be. Well, there's a new trilogy, and she's at the helm of it. And I think, but I think when the films ended, she said, "No, I want to do other stuff." And now she's done other stuff, and it's all kind of tanked. And some of it's passion projects, but no one wants to see it because everyone views her as Rey because she was an unknown beforehand. John Boyega at least had Attack the Block and a few other things.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, but I'd say, thing is, John Boyega's a good actor, and I've watched him in several things. Like, he's really good, and you go, like, oh, he's ace. Like, I could see him going off and doing something else. I think the thing is, just another example of this has been the MCU. Like, Robert Downey Jr. comes with baggage. Like, so he can sort of swoop in. He became Tony Stark, like personified. He was the face of, and unfortunately may still be the bloody face of the MCU. He's able to go off and do his other things and sort of like, passion projects or whatever. Like he's made enough money to basically buy the moon at this point. But then you see other actors that have kind of struggled with this thing of finding their identity. And I think of them, I think Chris Evans is actually the one that seems to have struggled the most. Where like he was ideal as Cap. Like, his Captain America is brilliant. I adore his iteration of Cap. But then you see him go off, and he's done films, and you sort of go, okay, I see. I think Knives Out is great in that, and I've seen
love him in Knives Out. Yeah.
He's done a couple of other films.
He's great in a film called I think it's called The Gifted, where there's a little girl that is his sister's, and he ends up having to look after her, but she's like hyper intelligent, and he's brilliant. I mean, putting with kids, he just seems to really understand, and even in Push and that when he's with what's she
Fanning, Dakota Fanning,
and that. But I think with comic books, it's a weird one because like as comic book nerds, we know that there are lots of different Spider-Man, lots of different there's different variations of Captain America, and we accept that. Some people go, well, Sam Wilson's not Captain America. But he is.
But he is, yeah.
But Bucky was Captain America. USA, we've had lots of different ones. Just accept the fact that it can go that way. But some people are like, no, it has to be this.
There's a bell curve, though, isn't there? I think this is the thing with audiences. I think this is how Stardom works. I'll use Chris Evans. I'll use the other Chris, as in Hemsworth. And I think they're the two prime examples where like there's the people that don't really give a shit, right? And they can watch him and go, oh, that's that dude. Oh, I know him. All right. You then get the majority that'll go, I've watched him I've seen him as Captain America. I've seen what he does. I've seen him with his shirt off. He's a buff dude. He's a big guy. Oh, I'm going to go see him in The Grey Man. And you watch him, it's like, why has he got a buzz cut and a mustache? Like, I don't know what's going on here. And you go watch The Losers. And he plays an absolute, like, tool in The Losers.
Really?
Great film. He's really good in it. But you're like, that's not, I don't expect him to be that. And I think there's a vast majority of the audience that are kind of still attuned to being like movie stars rather than actors. You know what I mean? Like, I know what to expect from a Mission Impossible, from a Tom Cruise film or an Arnie film, or like there are certain actors that shift. And so they struggle when they do things. And Hemsworth has had the kind of the same, where like Hemsworth's a funny guy, like legit funny, and he's inserted that into the Thor films, much to their detriment. But like he did it in Ghostbusters, and I am a fan of the Ghostbusters 2016 film.
I like it as well.
It's a good film,
He's
very funny. Yeah, yes, my cat. And I think he's great, and he sort of stands shoulder to shoulder with those professional comedians, and is able to hold his own. Many wouldn't.
Chris Pratt. I mean, look at Chris Pratt from Parks and Rec. A bit of a chubby guy. He comes into Guardians of the Galaxy, and he's just this chiseled Adonis of a man. And it's like,
but what he did, and this is the thing I was going to say, where Hemsworth has never found his other thing. So for Netflix, he's got the Extraction franchise, which actually I think
is great. Before.
Yeah, well, that's just all right. But what I'm saying is like, but Chris Pratt had Jurassic Park. So he's had a blockbuster series of films where you go, I've seen him in these billion-dollar films as something else. Oh, he's not just Star-Lord. I can now see him as the guy from Jurassic Park or whatever. And it gives him enough to do that. And I think this is the thing with, like, you need almost that breakaway to be able to say, I can do this and I can do that. And I think sometimes we these flash in the pan stars don't get that. I think it was I was maybe Keanu Reeves. It was Keanu Reeves was in an interview. It was about a couple of years ago, and he said one of the greatest pieces of advice he had was from Bruce Willis, and they were talking at some point, and he said to him, "Oh no, it was Samuel L. Jackson. Sorry, it was Sam Jackson that said this. It was Bruce Willis said to him on the set of Die Hard with a Vengeance. He said to Samuel Jackson, find yourself a franchise or find yourself what you can. He says, things turn to shit. I can fall back on John McClane. You know, Stallone's out there. He's got Rocky and Rambo. Schwarzenegger can go do the Terminator. Like, you have your fallback kind of thing. And then Sam Jackson's like, cool, I'm going to go become Nick Fury and become
also Mace Windu and
Mace
everything
Windu.
else.
Yeah, like literally, he's like, I'm going to fall back on all the franchises.
I'm going to be in everything. I'm going to be in every. I mean, Pedro Pascal's doing that at the moment, isn't it? It's like Pedro Pascal. Is he the Mandalorian? Well, not really anymore. Is he Mr. Fantastic? Is he in The Last of Us? Is he in Game of Thrones? It's like he's literally everywhere. I can't look away from a film without him popping up somewhere.
But weirdly, what that allowed them to do was to go off and do those things. So you either accept it and go, that's my fallback thing. So I will do 5 Die Hard films over a period of time. Again, varying in quality. And you get to go off and do other films, but you know, it sort of I think it gave someone like Bruce Willis that sort of thing where he had that knowledge of like, I'm not going to win an Oscar. To the extent that he can even make fun of it. If you ever seen the sort of Between Two Ferns with Zach Galifianakis, where he's like, you know, so where do you keep your Oscar? Sorry, no, your Blockbuster Entertainment Award.
but I mean, the thing is, Bruce Willis, it's like he went and did lots and lots of films in the last few years because he knew the fact that he's not going to be able to act. He's not going to be able to do anything. He took that thing of, oh, I'm going to take some crap films here and just turn up for, you know, he was selling cans of, is it Red Devil or something? You know, energy drink, because he thought, I am happy to do this shit stuff. So it puts money on the table.
Here's a different, and that's let's. I want to wrap up because this does transition us back to, and we'll sort of wrap up around this area. But this does transition because you say about the accident, and this was an instant, right? It changes the direction. But you're right. We never knew as the public the position that Bruce Willis was in, and a lot of people were like, "Why is he doing these awful movies?" Like he's churning out film after film, doing cameos or doing sort of roles, that sort of thing. And the truth, obviously, was finally revealed. Like he had a ticking clock. Like he knew he was like, right, I've got a family, I've got kids, I've got grandkids, I've got a family to take care of. I've got to just bank that money in any way I can, and so I've got to make those choices. And I feel that, like I'm not, I don't think he's not looking to set a foundation to save the world, but there was still that mentality. It was like, I'm not egotistical. I can't be selfish. I'm gonna have to go and do some utter shit, and it might tarnish my legacy, but I'm actually doing this because Demi Moore can't get an acting job, and I've got to sort of keep everyone in in clothes. But which may change because the substance is very, very good, and she's very, very good in it. But he made that choice, and once it sort of revealed it, and it put the final part of his career in a different light, and I was like, oh, I kind of respect you more for doing this dross. Now I'm never going to watch it, and that's fine. I will go back and I'll watch other things I adore that he's done, but like you go, oh, okay. And so you say about this sort of thing of the Superman. It's when the life gives you lemons, what do you do with it? It's and I think that sort of that thing isn't. I'm not going to say make lemonade because I hate that sort of thing. But it's I think you make a choice, don't you? You go, right, what am I going to do about this situation? Do I face into it, or do I let it beat me?
Do you go with the flow, or do you try and change the current? Is kind of the
Yes.
thing. And it's I feel like Reeves was pushing. It's almost it's I not to say it makes it worth it, but it's almost ironic. I feel like if this hadn't happened to him, he wouldn't have accepted it. I think he would have pushed and pushed and pushed, and he may have even caused great detriment to him and his family
Mm.
in refusal to really just accept either I've got to be Superman or I've got to do some crap.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe in the AU, he did all these kind of things, but I feel like if he was still alive, the only way he'd be making money is by popping up in every DC thing constantly. He'd be in Superman Returns. There would be in the Flash. He would be a more major role in that. Do you know what I mean? That's what I feel like.
I think, and I reckon he would have found himself in either a successful medical or police procedural drama in the 90s.
Tom Selleck.
Tom Selleck. No, yeah.
Tom Selleck's good in what he did.
Oh yeah, no, yeah.
The Blue
Magnum
Line?
PI, and obviously in Blues, and he's done stuff. But like, no, that's what I think would have happened. I think he'd have transitioned away from film. I think he'd have become TV star. Probably still been doing stage stuff, but I think you'd have found him in like ER or something like that, or like NYPD Blue or some equivalent like that.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
And they'd have made in jokes about him, being Superman or something.
You look good in blue. Maybe add a bit of red to that.
That's
kind of
it. Yeah. Why have you got those glasses on? That kind of thing.
Where's he gone? Oh,
yeah.
I thought he said no. He just flown off.
Yeah. That's it. Just to sort of wrap up, then I do want to sort of finish off on this kind of thing of the experience of sort of seeing this. And it did sort of make me think about a final piece that I do want to end up on the nerdy piece. Really is. One of the reasons I did this, I started doing this, is because the new Superman's film's coming out, right? I'm nothing if not an opportunist. I'm not going to deny that. But what's happened is, as I've gone through this, you kind of start to, and this is what I'm interested in when I'm almost reluctant to start the Snyder stuff, in all honesty, because having gone through this, and even with the Superman Returns, what it makes you feel, and how I sort of feel about Superman and just the character and stuff in this day and age, as we sort of stand in sort of May 2025, and you do sort of go, this is the kind of character we need. Like, I feel like this is something that should be important. Like, I know, we clasp onto like Batman because he's cool and all this other stuff, or like, other things are sort of like, will take off, and there's been all these sort of douchebag versions of Superman that have become popular since like Homelander or Omni-Man and even like Brightburn, several sort of years ago and 15 years ago, whatever. There's this thing of like pushing the character and going like, yeah, but if you had all that power, you'd be awful. And I think it goes back to what you were saying before, Maff. It's about having that power and not using it. And I think that's kind of this thing at the moment of having this kind of sincerity and kind of restraint and just being humble. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how Superman plays in 2025. But it seems more important than ever for this character to be that character.
It's interesting because I know this goes to John Williams, but when you hear the Superman theme, you kind of feel like you take an extra step and you do the Superman grow up kind of thing, don't you? And it gives you that feeling, and that now you are going to tackle the other films and go in and say what you think of them, but I don't think any of them give you that same feeling as when Reeves, when you see him in the suit and you see him kind of save Lois and save the copter and things like that. That fanfare of music that you get makes you feel something different, and that Star Wars does it as well. Jewel of the Fates. When you hear Jewel of the Fates, you just kind of it's a great thing to kind of work out to, because it gets your heart pumping and things like that. I wonder whether this new film is going to be able to do that and be able to kind of give you that feeling.
And it's an interesting point, actually, because I think, and I'd be interested to ask sort of Mike from your point of view, because we're all lovers of John Williams. Like John Williams, sort of like, literally sort of his score, like everything from Jaws through to Star Wars and Superman, Indiana Jones, Home Alone. Like it goes on and on and on. Like, the dude is the sort of like score of my life, really. But you're right, Matt. You are absolutely 100% spot on, right? And I hear that dun 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 dun, like just the start of that, like hairs, like stand up, like you feel good. It makes you feel good. It increases. But like, I wonder if it's because I associate it with the iconography. Like once I hear that sort of those just couple of notes, you mentioned the scene from the first movie of him coming out of the Fortress of Solitude in the Cape for the first time is just like it's this phenomenal. It kind of like it lifts your spirits. But for you again, I can imagine, Mike. I'm not saying you don't have this, but Star Wars is your jam.
Yeah.
And Williams being all over that as well. Like, he has that ability, and there must be that thing if you hear either the Star Wars theme or sort of like the Duel of the Fates or any of those, probably more than positive songs of from the Alliance that do probably have the same thing. You associate with the iconography of the films that give you a, I don't know, like
a boost. Yeah, I think it's that. I think what music does amazingly, especially John Williams, is that you can be doing something else and you can hear it. You don't have to give, like when you see Darth Vader, you have to look at him. When you see the Supermanish, you have to look at it. You can't really passively view something. You have to generally look at it. You can't peripherally see Superman. That doesn't make sense. You can peripherally hear the Superman theme.
Yeah.
So I think when you watch the right movie and it's got the right score to it, and it does that, the symbiosis of the visual elements and the hearing elements come together, visual and audio. I think what that does is once those bonds have been made, and I think again, John Williams is one of the best of doing this, if not the best, then you can passively hear those things going. And I think that's what the beauty of it is. You can be thrown back into that moment when you don't have to focus on being there. If I'm walking down the street and I hear, a kid ignites a lightsaber, or someone is listening to sees us TikTok on their phone, and then the Duel of the Fates plays or whatever, I'm immediately, a part of my brain goes, here's some serotonin because you love Star Wars.
Yeah.
And so I think the music is a big part. I think with the new Superman, I'm more excited about this because I've watched all these 4 Superman films. I'm much more excited about the new Superman than anything, because back to what you're saying, Scott, is the hope of it is, I grew up in the 90s. I'm all about, a lot of what I like is edgier stuff. I love action films. Yeah, but it's edgy when it's not really edgy. It's just a lot of darkness, The Matrix and the Equilibrium and like Batman, The Dark Knight.
We wear trench coats.
We wear trench coats and all black, and we dye our hair black, and everything is black, and my soul is black, and the crow is my personality, all that kind of stuff. And it's like, I love a lot of that stuff. But I think that we had that. Then we had the Renaissance of superheroes, which was kind of like, here's the grittier versions. You got Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, but it's still that. And then we had the pushback, which is the anti-hero stuff. We had Venom and The Boys, and to a lesser extent, Brightburn and Invisible Man, Invincible. And so it kind of comes in ebbs and flows. And what I'm hoping now is, because again, when the world turns to shit, that's when a lot of the time the best art comes out. Yeah. A lot of the best music and all that kind of thing. And I'm hoping now, because everything's kind of on fire for most nations on the planet, I'm hoping we get back into the era of hope. I think that's what Fantastic Four is representing. I'm not excited about Fantastic Four because I don't really give a crap about them. I've never read any comics. I've only seen the movies, which are a mixed bag. And so I don't really care that much. But the fact it seems to be lighter and it's more of like, it's a bygone era, etc. With the new Superman, I wasn't that hyped until I watched these 4, and I'm like, if this is more like this Superman of like saving people and a impossibly perfect individual of morality, I'm much more into that idea of seeing that film rather than being like, here's another godlike being who's tortured and has to struggle with the power. Because I'm like, I've seen a million of them now. We even saw it in Star Wars, which I love, but that's Luke in Star Wars. And I appreciate what they did with Luke in the sequel trilogy. I personally am a defender of that. I think it's the right thing to do. But I want my new Star Wars to be filled with hope. We've got Andor going on at the moment, top tier. Next Star Wars, I want it to be hope-filled. I want it to be positive. I've had edgy stuff for quite a while now. I want the hope of Superman, and that's really what I'm hoping for with the new Superman film.
Weirdly, I think that's what the trailer is all about. The trailer
100%. And the dog, Crypto,
Well, Crypto is ace, but I think one of the things I was sort of, as I watched that trailer, I was thinking, I love the trailer, and that there's a new one coming very soon.
I think it's today or tomorrow, actually, or this
Is
week.
it? Oh, yeah, so it's
I
very,
think
very
it's in the
soon.
morning.
Yeah. So we're going to get a new one. So by the time this comes out, it'll be, you know, it'll have played. But that first trailer, I remember watching that first trailer, there were three parts of it that I was in, and having sort of already started, getting ready for this, and I think I'd already watched the first one by that point. I felt the same as you, Mike. I was like, right, this new film is setting up for the same thing. It starts with an injured Superman having to call for help. And I always think back to like Grant Morrison saying about Batman. Like the first thing he does, when it all goes wrong, he's like everyone saw he's a loner and doesn't work with anybody. The first thing he does after it all goes wrong, he rings the bell and calls for help. Like he calls for Alfred. That's what you're supposed to. There's that unification. That's what Superman's all about. He calls to Crypto, Superman's best friend. The dog looks like a pain in the ass, but like I get it. Like it looks great, but it shows that vulnerability. Instantly, it cuts to another scene of like some explosion, and Superman is rushing in to act as a barrier for that small girl, and you're like, all right,
That's my favorite part of the trailer.
yeah, and you're like, that's so sort of I can imagine like that's what Reeve Superman's been doing, and then the other bit is weirdly is where the guy throws it's like a can or a tin,
Yes, yeah.
at the back of Superman's head. And the fact he's sort of like, you can see that Superman's annoyed, but he's like, walk on. Because like
That's the restraint.
Yeah,
He could do a Homelander and turn around.
That's exactly it. And I felt like that's exactly what I felt. I was like, this is a complete response to that scene at the end of season 3, I think, of The Boys, where someone throws something at Homelander or at Homelander's son, and he basically zaps them with his heat vision.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, this is exactly what they're aiming for. Like this is a hopeful, restrained, humble Superman, and that's what I'm here for. So I'm,
Been through the age of retaliation. Let's go into the age of let's try and be the better man. That's hopefully where I want this. I want 2025 and onward to be that.
Well, if you look at like
the golden age,
the first era or the first photo of Henry Cavill Superman that came out was of him during the fight it turned out to be in Smallville, is when he's been thrown into the bank, and it's him stepping out, and it's all dusty and it's all dark, and it's kind of like, oh, this is a battle scene. The first thing that you're telling us about this Superman is a battle scene. Like that was the first image that ever came out. It wasn't Superman flying. It wasn't, saying him saying about the S stands for hope or any shit like that. It was his Superman in a fight, and that kind of framed it for me about what this a power fantasy. That's the difference.
Yeah.
Right. Anyway, we should wrap up.
This one doesn't though. This one has that hope, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like look up for the hope.
Look up. Yes, thank you for reminding me about that. Look up, which is I think is translates of keep your head up. It's not just look up, it's keep your head up. This is going to be.
I think as well. I mean, the fact that it looks like you say when he gets that can thrown at him, and he's obviously, I think Guy Gardner comes in and kind of, shuts the bank up or whatever it is. You can see that there is an issue there.
Yeah.
You can see that there's a low. So he's going to have to come against it. And hopefully it's not just a case I can punch my way out of this. There's going to be something more to it.
Yeah. There'll be more punching them in the past, but I think they're leaning into science, they're leaning into the old school. So I can't wait. I'm very, very much looking forward to it. And this has been a great journey to do it. Anyway, any final thoughts on the documentary? I mean, other than go watch it, find it, watch it. If you're a fan of Superman or anything else, like or just humanity, like it's an amazing story.
Yeah,
100%.
Right, let's go around the region. Like I say, we're going to wrap up. But Maff, what are you up to, and where can people find you?
Mike's probably going to do all this plugging anyway, but when this comes out, I will have been on the final episodes of Andor and that. So I can't wait for Wednesday. And that I can't wait until next week when I don't have to give up sleep to sit and watch, because you start watching one and it's like, yeah, I should really go to bed, but I need to watch the next one. And then you watch it and you think, I really should stop watching this because it's destroying the inside of me of what's happening. But but also we've been doing Clone Wars conversations. I think still will be going at the moment.
Yeah, after Andor, we'll be continuing that.
So yes, you'll find me popping up on on the Star Wars Chit Chat channel.
Cool. More Star Wars, more hope, more positivity for the world. That's what
Yes. So from me, again, Star Wars Chit Chat is a new channel I've launched. The podcast feed's been around for ages. I've got all my Star Wars stuff and uploaded there for years. So it's all my Star Wars interviews, all Clone Wars conversations, all my old Star Wars comics and canon stuff. New YouTube channel, Star Wars Chit Chat. All the Andor stuff's on there, very long conversations, breakdowns, things you missed, etc. And then also lots of shorts and stuff on there too. Lots of fun things to come. Clone Wars Conversations is continuing after Andor. We're also going to do a special with me, Maff, and Dave about Rogue One. So the week after Andor comes out, because it is basically the finale. So Maff actually has to wait another week before we can get some sleep, because we're going to be doing that pretty much straight after. And then also, this by the time this is released, this will probably what I'm about to say is going to be out. But myself and Spider Dan, we are, who was obviously on Superman 4 with you, we are covering the Forbidden Worlds Film Festival. It's in Bristol, and very, very excited about that. We are part of the press, so we have got we're officially going to be trying to interview a few people there, but we're going to be covering every day of that. Lots of films. I've barely seen any of them. I've seen Young Sherlock Holmes, which I released a review of on Genuine Chit Chat,
Love that
and
film.
also Aliens. We're getting to do a Q&A with Gail and Heard, which is very exciting. I've never seen Tremors, unfortunately, so that's playing. I know I've never seen Tremors. Terrible. Loads of other great films there. There's like Alligator and Blood Tide and all kinds of Battle Beyond the Stars, which I've never seen, which I've been wanting to see for ages.
Shocker.
Loads of great films. So we're going to be covering all that stuff. Me and Spider Dan, we're going to be releasing certain episodes every day, all about loads and loads and loads of film stuff.
Amazing.
So that's basically the best way to find me, at Genuine Chit Chat and at Star Wars Chit Chat on all the social media places, just to keep up to date with what I'm doing. And I'm pumping out reels and shorts at the moment. So if you don't want to commit to a long form podcast, which I would encourage you to do, then please do that. And my listening has been a lot of 20th Century Geeks patron stuff. Been loving all the early access and loving the 30-minute thoughts as well. Been adoring your patron stuff, Scott. So thank you for that.
Yeah, so I'm going to get back on the 30-minute thoughts. Got some good stuff. Got to do that. But yeah, me and Julian sort of catch up. We've just done on the Patreon. That's a good point. And before I would say, I would usually just say to younger generations, younger generation. But the fact that you're stepping up, Mike, and watching so much more, I'm always, and the fact you take it in your stride when us older people are like, you got to watch this, you got to watch this, you got to watch this.
Try my best.
Bombard you with like stuff. Yes, but on the Patreon, go check it out. I'm joined by Julian from the sister podcast Stories Out of Time and Space, and what we're doing there, we're releasing everything early. We're releasing it all on there. So we've done a full RoboCop retrospective, and when I say full, I mean full, not just the films. We did the cartoons, we did the TV show, we did the Prime directives and the reboot, and as with many of these franchises, the quality varies, but it's mostly crap. And now we're doing our redux, so we're starting to do these sort of more. We're going back and doing some our sequels and follow-ups. We've just done a complete trilogy of the Creature, the sort of Creature from the Black Lagoon, and this week I'll be doing Return of the Jedi. Actually, we'll be talking about that. And on the main feed, we're actually releasing all of the stuff we had as our original Patreon stuff from several years. Lots of films, lots of shorts, alternate takes on things. So yeah, lots of things on there as well. Stories Out of Time and Space. And just find us at 20th Century Geek on pretty much all, not TikTok and not Twitter. So on Threads, on Facebook, on Instagram, 20th Century Geek. Go find us on that. But yeah, for now though, guys, thank you very much for joining me on this. And also, more than anything, thank you very much for sharing such personal things with me. I really appreciate it. And it's been a learning experience for me today. So greatly appreciate everything we've been able to talk about. And ladies and gentlemen, we shall see you on the next episode.